Chapter 1289. When a person was about to die, they would be able to see through many things. It was a pity that Zhongli Mu had finally seen through all of this, but he no longer had time. However, Yan Ji was at a loss. This was different from the sword venerable Zhongli Mu in his memories. Although Zhongli Mu often cultivated in seclusion, he would give guidance to his disciples as soon as he came out. How could the founder of their Windcloud Sword Tomb be such a selfish person? But now that Zhongli Mu had personally told him about it, Yan Ji didn't know how to respond to it. Zhongli Mu said in a low voice, "I don't have much time. Sit down and calm your mind. Empty your dantian and transfer all of your power to your meridians. Then, recite this mantra." With that, Zhongli Mu pointed at Yan Ji's forehead. His entire body was instantly enveloped by sword aura. Yan Ji could not refuse. He did not even have time to think. He could only subconsciously follow Zhongli Mu's instructions. In the next moment, Zhongli Mu waved his hand. The black dragon formed by the sword soul struggled, but it was enveloped by boundless sword aura and entered Yan Ji's body. In that instant, Zhongli Mu seemed to have aged a few decades. His hair and beard were all white, the color of decay. However, the sword aura in his hand did not relax at all. It forcefully suppressed the sword soul and helped Yan Ji fuse with it. In an instant, the power around Yan Ji's body reached its peak. Cracks appeared all over his body as if his entire body was about to explode. Seeing this, Zhongli Mu waved his hand. His primordial spirit burned with golden light. He erupted with the last bit of power and finally suppressed the backlash. In the next moment, sword aura around Yan Ji soared into the sky. The astonishing sword aura had even reached the level of disrupting the laws, tearing the heavens and splitting the earth. Seeing this, a hint of a smile appeared in Zhongli Mu's rotten and turbid eyes. The pinnacle of martial arts, an immortal of the sword. That was a level that even his teacher hadn't been able to reach. Maybe Sword Saint Gu Qingqing had been able to reach that level 500 years ago, but when he was young, he challenged Lonely Onlywa and died. Shen Kangwu had studied the method to refine sword souls for his entire life, but he was born at the wrong time. Zhongli Mu had waited his entire life, but in the end, his opportunity never came. But now, before he died, he finally saw it. The gap between man and nature, the legendary bottleneck of martial immortal, had been broken by his own hands. After a long while, when Yan Ji had calmed the violent energy in his body and opened his eyes again, he saw Zhongli Mu, who was already at the end of his rope. Ancestral Master. Zhongli Mu looked at Yan Ji and smiled. He pointed at his chest, but he didn't say anything. In the next moment, he was no longer breathing. The next moment, he was already dead. Yan Ji hugged Zhongli Mu's corpse and roared. Sword Qi soared into the sky. He didn't care whether Zhongli Mu was a selfish person or not. After so many years, he had sincerely thought about the prosperity of the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb. Every time he came out of seclusion, he would use a small amount of time to give pointers to the younger generation. In fact, what he used up was his lifespan. If he had remained in secluded cultivation, he might have lived for a few more decades until the birth of a sword soul. Yan Ji removed Zhongli Mu's hand from his chest and said in a deep voice, "Ancestral Master, I know what you mean. My Windcloud Sword Tomb rarely takes the initiative to attack, but we will not let go of the humiliation we received. World Alliance's Qingqing Di. This time, I will let him know whether his fist is stronger, or my Windcloud Sword Tomb's sword is sharper." In the past, Qingqing Di destroyed Windcloud Sword Tomb's formation with one punch, and heavily injured Windcloud Sword Tomb's ancestor Zhongli Mu with the second punch. This matter was seen as a humiliation for Windcloud Sword Tomb. Since then, no one from Windcloud Sword Tomb stepped into the martial world for more than a year, because it was shameful. Zhongli Mu could not seek revenge from Qingqing Di, so he would personally seek revenge from Qingqing Di. However, Yan Ji did not know that he had completely misunderstood Zhongli Mu's intentions. When he had just been defeated by Emperor Qingqing Di, Zhongli Mu had indeed been unwilling and resentful. However, it was also because of Qinqindi's punch that Zhongli Mu completely thought things through and untied the knot in his heart at the same time. He pointed to his chest, not because he wanted Yan Ji to help him take revenge, but because he wanted Yan Ji to stay true to his heart and not be affected by external things and emotions like him, losing his nature as a swordsman. In the end, he did not expect that because he died too quickly, he could not say what he should have said, and actually caused Yan Ji to misunderstand. Carrying Zhongli Mu's corpse, Yan Ji left the Windcloud Sword Tomb. There were already many Windcloud Sword Tomb martialists gathered outside. After all, the fluctuations just now were too terrifying. That powerful sword chi that could tear the laws was something they had never seen before. Looking at Zhongli Mu's corpse, everyone's eyes were filled with grief, but they were not surprised. After all, Zhongli Mu was someone who had lived for close to 500 years. Excluding a monster like the old Celestial Master, he was practically the longest-living martialist in the underworld. Ever since he was severely injured by Qinqindi's punch, Zhongli Mu did not continue to cultivate in seclusion. To him, seclusion was useless at that time. His vitality was being consumed at every moment. Therefore, from then on, the Windcloud Sword Tomb martialists were already prepared for the news that Zhongli Mu could pass away at any time. Looking at the crowd below, Yan Ji said in a deep voice, "In a month, we will attack the World Alliance. Windcloud Sword Tomb can only take back what we have lost with our own swords." The eyes of the Windcloud Sword Tomb martialists below all bloomed with intense sharpness. Although Windcloud Sword Tomb had always been low-key, in reality, the Windcloud Sword Tomb martialists were more arrogant than anyone else. It was the same even when they looked at the other major sword sections. Sword King City. A bunch of ignorant people who only treated the sword as a pure killing weapon. Forgetting the sword hut? They had some foundation, but they did not have the sharpness of a swordsman. They were too useless. Yunu Palace. Women were not worthy of respect. Hidden Sword Villa. Hee, trash. Windcloud Sword Tomb had never claimed to be the leader of the 5 major sword sections. Even when Sword Sovereign Jianghu was around, they did not call themselves that. However, it was obvious that even if Windcloud Sword Tomb did not regard themselves as the leader of the 5 major sword sects, they still regarded themselves as the path of return for the Sword Dao. Now that they were smashed by Qinqindi's punch, even their pride was completely shattered. This was what they had lost. Now, they had to rely on themselves to take back what they had lost. A month later, when Yan Ji had slightly stabilized the power of the Sword Soul, he directly led hundreds of Windcloud Sword Tomb disciples towards the World Alliance. Windcloud Sword Tomb did not conceal their actions. They just led their people and headed straight for the World Alliance. For Windcloud Sword Tomb, they did not need to conceal their actions, nor did they need to use any schemes. This was because of Yan Ji's existence. In this 1 month, of course, Yan Ji had completely grasped the power of the Sword Soul. Only then did he know exactly how much power he had obtained. At the same time, he also knew exactly how much Zhongli Mu and his master, Jianghu, had sacrificed in order to obtain this power that was beyond the boundaries of heaven and man. In the end, fate made a fool of people. The people who wanted this power the most were all dead. Instead, he, who did not know anything from the beginning to the end, unexpectedly obtained this power. In front of the World Alliance's entrance, the martial artists of the World Alliance all had faint confidence and pride on their faces. It was not simply pride, but pride for their identity. As a sect that was born in the wilderness, the World Alliance had suffered a lot of discrimination in the early days. Especially those large sects with deep heritage, they actually looked down on the uncivilized people of the World Alliance. The World Alliance was able to achieve what it was today because of Qinqindi's pair of iron fists. Not long ago, Qinqindi fought his way to Windcloud Sword Tomb and severely injured Zhongli Mu. This let the entire underworld know that in this world, there was another supreme expert who could influence the entire situation of the underworld. That person's name was Qinqindi. World Alliance's Qinqindi. From then on, the World Alliance could be considered to be truly proud and elated. In Qinqindi's words, the World Alliance does not bully others, but no one should think about bullying the World Alliance. In a large hall of the World Alliance's headquarters, a middle-aged man held a wine jar. He drank while scratching his head, handling the various chores of the World Alliance. He was the World Alliance's Deputy Alliance Master, Star-Plucking Sword, Fang Qingting. Fang Qingting was previously an abandoned disciple of the Forgetful Sword Hut. He had offended an important figure in the sect and was chased after. He was accidentally rescued by Qinqing Di, who had yet to establish the World Alliance at that time. He had followed him until now. Originally, the World Alliance did not have a Deputy Alliance Master. However, when Qinqing Di left more than a year ago, he forcefully gave him the position of Deputy Alliance Master and asked him to help manage the World Alliance. The reason was that the entire World Alliance was made up of uncivilized people. Fang Qingting was the only one who came from a large sect and had experience and ability. If not him, who else could he assign to? Although Fang Qingting complained, as long as it was a task given to him by Qinqing Di, he would not reject it. That was because his life was given to him by Qinqing Di. If not for Qinqing Di, he would have been taken back by the people of the Forgetful Sword Hut and crippled of his martial arts. Moreover, although his talent was not bad, it was merely not bad. If he cultivated diligently his entire life, he would have reached the peak of the real pellet state. However, after following Qinqing Di, although Qinqing Di did not teach him martial arts, he taught him many martial arts, allowing him to step into the true fire spiritual cultivation state. Just a month ago, Qinqing Di actually made a trip back and gave him a few things to refine. The power within them was so strong that it was simply unimaginable. It actually loosened the bottleneck that he had not broken through for more than a decade, allowing him to successfully step into the mysterious heaven and earth state. This was a realm that he did not even dare to think about before. A gentleman would die for a bosom friend. Perhaps this was how it felt. Qinqing Di had given him everything. Now, not to mention managing the World Alliance, even if he wanted his life, he was willing to do it. At that moment, a melodious sword chime suddenly came from outside. A voice resounded throughout the entire World Alliance. Qinqing Di. Come out and die. Chapter 1290. Ever since the World Alliance was established, it had never been attacked by anyone. It wasn't because the World Alliance was strong, but because it wasn't worth it. The World Alliance was ultimately an unruly gang. Everyone in the West Chu underworld knew that Qinqing Di was a madman. He wouldn't care who dared to provoke him. As long as he set his eyes on you, you wouldn't have an easy time. Therefore, no one would cause trouble for Qinqing Di unless there was an absolute conflict of interest. It wasn't worth it. When Fang Qingting walked out, he was shocked to see Yan Ji leading the people of Windcloud Sword Tomb. Previously, when Qinqing Di heavily injured Zhongli Mu with a punch, Windcloud Sword Tomb didn't cause trouble for the World Alliance again. Fang Qingting thought that the matter was over. He didn't expect them to come looking for trouble again. Most importantly, Fang Qingting had already reached the heaven and earth elemental realm, but he still couldn't see through Yan Ji's cultivation. He clearly remembered that Yan Ji should be in the heaven and earth elemental realm like him, but how did Yan Ji's strength increase so rapidly? Although Fang Qingting was still puzzled, he still stood out and said in a deep voice, Yan Ji, what is the meaning of this? Do you still want to fight with the World Alliance? Yan Ji said indifferently, Emperor Qinqing Di killed my ancestral master and humiliated my Windcloud Sword Tomb. I'm here today to take back what my Windcloud Sword Tomb lost. Where's Qinqing Di? Does he not even have the guts to stand out? Fang Qingting snorted coldly. Yan Ji, don't you distort the truth. The people of the World Alliance never caused trouble. It was your Windcloud Sword Tomb who bullied the weak and touched the young master of the World Alliance. That's why the Alliance Master attacked. Back when the Alliance Master had attacked Zhongli Mu, he hadn't killed him because he was too old. Now that he's dead, you want to blame it on the Alliance Master? Why don't you say that the person who killed him was someone from a few hundred years ago? Although Fang Qingting used to be from a respectable sect, he had mingled with the World Alliance for a long time, so he was very good with words. At the very least, Yanji could not win against him in an argument. Therefore, Yanji waved his hand and said in a deep voice, "I'm not here to reason with you today. I've said it before. Let Qinqing come out and die. If he wasn't here, he would kill his disciple. If his disciple wasn't here, it would destroy the entire Heaven Alliance. I don't believe that Qinqing will just sit back and watch as his foundation is destroyed." As Yanji's voice fell, a blurry black dragon behind him roared with a shocking sword intent, causing the void to tremble. Fang Qingting's expression suddenly changed, but before he could say anything, Yanji had already waved his hand and shouted, "Kill!" Just as he said before, he was not here to reason with Fang Qingting. He had already blamed Zhongli Mu's death on Qinqing. He had even misunderstood Zhongli Mu's intentions, so he had to kill Qinqing to take revenge. Since Qinqing wasn't here, he would destroy the Heaven Alliance first. In fact, even Yanji himself did not realize that ever since he merged with the Sword Soul, Yanji's personality had become extremely cold and arrogant. In the past, Yanji's personality was actually not that strong. However, now that he was going to destroy the entire Heaven Alliance just to find Qinqing, he did not feel the slightest burden or pressure in his heart. Fang Qingting's eyes were filled with despair as he watched the people from Windcloud Sword Tomb make their move. He was very clear about the Heaven Alliance's strength. Apart from Emperor Qinqing, there was also him, who had been brought up by Emperor Qinqing all the way. In fact, there were not many experts. After all, the Heaven Alliance had only been around for a short period of time. They were born in the wilderness, so the gap in their foundation was a big problem. If he did not include Qinqing, how could he defeat the cultivators from Windcloud Sword Tomb? Therefore, Fang Qingting instantly made a decision. He shouted at the people behind him, "Run! Run to the Kunlun Devil Cult's branch in the southern barbarian land and ask for help." He did not know where Qinqing went. He only knew that Qinqing had a very close relationship with the leader of the Kunlun Devil Cult, Chu Xiu. Furthermore, Chu Xiu was good friends with their young master, Xie Xiaolu. In the current world, only the Kunlun Devil Cult was not afraid of Windcloud Sword Tomb and was still willing to protect the Heaven Alliance. However, even if the other people from the Heaven Alliance escaped, Fang Qingting could not. If he escaped, how could he be worthy of Qinqing's kindness? How could he be worthy of the Heaven Alliance? Fang Qingting unsheathed the sword in his hand and stabbed out. The light of the stars, the sun, and the moon were all overshadowed by the sharpness of his sword. It was extremely dazzling. Yanji raised his eyebrows and said, "Forgetting Sword Hut's lunisolar and galaxy sword technique? Unfortunately, although your strength is not bad, you are not a qualified swordsman. Swords should not be used like this. What's the point of making so many fancy things?" Yanji did not have a sword in his hand, but he only pointed his finger lightly, and the light gathered by Fang Qingting's sword had already exploded. Fang Qingting immediately spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying. In front of a martial immortal, even the Elysium was as weak as an ant. Yanji walked forward and looked down at Fang Qingting, who was lying on the ground. He said calmly, "I only want to avenge my ancestor. I don't want to kill the innocent. Tell me where Qinqing is. If you can live, the people of the Heaven Alliance can also live." Fang Qingting spat out a mouthful of spittle mixed with blood at Yanji. He cursed, F***CKU, Poochie. A soft sound rang out, and Fang Qingting's forehead was directly pierced by a sword aura. Stubborn fool. At this moment, a martial artist from Windcloud Sword Tomb walked over and said in a low voice, "Sir, there are too many people from the Heaven Alliance. They only want to escape. We only killed 30% of them, and we can't catch up with the rest. These people are all fleeing towards the south. They should be heading towards the Kunlun Devil Cult's branch in the southern barbarian land. Should we still chase after them?" Yanji frowned slightly. Kunlun Devil Cult? Chu Xiu. Actually, the hatred between Windcloud Sword Tomb and Kunlun Devil Cult was not that big. One of the reasons was that Windcloud Sword Tomb was very low profile. Most of the martial artists cultivated in the sword tomb and would not step out of the pugilistic world. They did not pay much attention to the difference between the righteous and the evil. It was only when Chu Xiu occupied the Kunlun mountain and wanted to rebuild the Kunlun devil cult that Zhongli Mu made a move once. Moreover, ever since Chu Xiu destroyed the Great Light Temple and the Sabodhi Monastery, the Kunlun devil cult's momentum of dominating the pugilistic world had already begun to show. This caused all the major sects to be extremely vigilant. However, there was still a difference between the Kunlun devil cult that Chu Xiu was in charge of and the Kunlun devil cult that Dugu Weiwei was in charge of 500 years ago. 500 years ago, Dugu Weiwei's Kunlun devil cult was that those who obeyed it would prosper, and those who opposed it would perish. But now, the Kunlun devil cult that Chu Xiu was in charge of was not so overbearing, but it began to advance step by step, nibbling away some of the forces in the pugilistic world. Now, the entire South China was occupied. Although there were some knowledgeable people who thought that it was necessary to eradicate Chu Xiu as soon as possible. Otherwise, when the Kunlun devil cult grew stronger again, there would be endless troubles in the future. But since the destruction of the Buddhism sect, who dared to start another war between the righteous and the evil? Under normal circumstances, Windcloud's sword tomb did not dare and did not want to provoke Chu Xiu. But now, the powerful power brought by the fusion of the sword's soul gave Yan Ji confidence. Last time when Chu Xiu destroyed the Sabodhi Zen monastery, Yan Ji was also a spectator. At that time, he had already stepped into the mysterious realm of heaven and earth. He also had to admit that in the mysterious realm of heaven and earth, Chu Xiu was almost invincible. But now, he had stepped into another world. Even if it was the devil lord Chu Xiu, would he be able to fight? Let's go to South China. Yan Ji waved his hand and led the other martial artists all the way to South China. The movement caused by Windcloud's sword tomb was huge. On the second day, the entire West Chu martial arts world knew about it. For so many years, Windcloud's sword tomb had rarely ventured out. However, this time, when he did, he caused a huge commotion. Within a day, he defeated the World Alliance. Emperor Qin Shengdi of the World Alliance was nowhere to be found, and Deputy Alliance Master Fang Qingding was killed on the spot. Of course, this was not the most shocking thing. The most shocking thing was that Yan Ji actually went straight to South China and pointed his sword at the Kunlun Devil Cult's branch hall in South China. Since Chu Xiu destroyed the North and South Buddhist sects, almost no one in the entire martial arts world dared to go against him. Now, Windcloud's sword tomb actually dared to provoke the Kunlun devil cult. This made everyone feel that either Windcloud's sword tomb was crazy, or they had some unknown trump card. At this time, in the branch hall of South China, Chu Wuji leisurely moved a chair and sat outside to bask in the sun. Chu Xiu and the others were still in closed-door cultivation. Chu Wuji was also in closed-door cultivation previously. But with the special soul crystals brought by Chu Xiu, he successfully stepped into mysterious heaven and earth. He did not continue his closed-door cultivation, but returned to the lower realm to guard the branch hall. At the same time, he also took care of the construction progress of the branch hall in the lower realm. Of course, he was bored in closed-door cultivation, so he prepared to return to the lower realm to rest. In fact, although Chu Wuji was not that kind of lazy character, he was not the kind of madman who only focused on cultivation. Most of the time, he still held an attitude of letting nature take its course. Previously, the hidden devil lineage needed him to hold up the facade, so he naturally had to be tense. Now that there was Chu Xiu, he could also take a break from his busy schedule. Tangya, who was taking turns to rest in the upper realm, also came to Chu Wuji's side at this time. He smiled and said, "Lord Chu, did you learn this from Old Wei? You like to bask in the sun so much." Chu Wuji glanced at Tangya and said lightly, "When you reach my age, you will know how comfortable it is to take a break from your busy schedule to bask in the sun. Of course, don't learn from me. Following official Chu, your current strength is far from the peak. By the way, I heard that you seem to have some grudges with the Tang sect in Sichuan. Haven't you thought of going back after so many years?" Tang Ye was considered to be relatively young and had more potential among the martial artists under Chu Xiu's command. Relying on the Daoist environment, he had already reached the true fire spirit refinement realm. Tang Ye chuckled and said, "The past is like smoke." After following official Chu for so many years, I have already let go of the past. Just when Chu Wuji wanted to say something, a martial artist from the Kunlun devil cult suddenly ran over and said loudly, "Lord Chu, the World Alliance has come to ask for help." Chapter 1291. The Kunlun demon cult had already set up many branches in the southern barbarian land. When the Heavens Union's martial artists just appeared here, they were already discovered by the Kunlun demon cult's martial artists and knew the details of the matter. Hearing that World Alliance had been destroyed and that Yan Ji and the other warriors of Storm's Sword Tomb were heading towards them, Chu Wuji felt that something was wrong. It was normal for Storm's Sword Tomb to take advantage of Qinqingdi's absence to attack World Alliance. After all, they had just been humiliated by Qinqingdi. However, they knew that World Alliance had come to Kunlun Devil Cult to seek protection, yet they still dared to make a move. Where did their confidence come from? Ever since Chu Xiu destroyed the North and South Buddhist sects, it had been a long time since anyone dared to touch Kunlun Devil Cult's tiger whiskers. Chu Wuji had interacted with Storm Sword Tomb before. Although this sect was low-key, they weren't idiots. They probably had something to rely on for doing this. Chu Wuji immediately turned to Tang Ye and said, "Quickly return to Daoist and inform Sect Leader Chen and Sect Leader Chen of this matter." Tang Ye was astonished. "It's just Storm Sword Tomb, it shouldn't be so serious, right?" Chu Wuji shook his head. "I'm not sure, but my intuition tells me that something isn't right. Moreover, World Alliance has been destroyed. No matter what, we have to inform Sect Leader Chen." Tang Ye also knew the relationship between Qinqingdi and Kunlun Devil Cult. He nodded and immediately returned to Daoist to inform. At the same time, Chu Wuji called Grandmaster Yuan Ji and Phantom King Chaoing over. "Can the two of you use the formation of the Lower Realms Branch Palace?" Grandmaster Yuan Ji said, "We can use it, but Sect Leader told us to focus on the Daoist side. So, the formation of the Lower Realm isn't complete yet." Phantom King Chaoing said impatiently, "Even if it's not complete, it's enough to block a heaven and earth profound understanding peak opponent. Why are you being so careful? The Kunlun Devil Cult is so strong. Who in the lower realm can be our match?" Although Chaoing joined the Kunlun Devil Cult because he was threatened by Chu Xiu, the feeling of being invincible was really good. Unlike back in Eastern Qi, when he was designing a formation, he would have to consider whether it would be able to block that formation or this formation. He would be frustrated by all the questions. At this moment, Yan Ji's voice rang out from outside the Kunlun Devil Cult's branch palace. "Yan Ji of Windcloud Sword Mound requests an audience with Kunlun Cult Master Chu." The voice reverberated through the entire Kunlun Devil Cult subhall. After Chu Wuji heard it, his expression suddenly changed. Chu Wuji was not Fang Qingtang. He could only sense that Yan Ji was very powerful, but he could not sense his opponent's exact strength. He had seen a martial immortal in the Daoist, a real martial immortal. At that moment, when Yan Ji spoke, Chu Wuji could tell from his voice that he was a genuine martial immortal. But a martial immortal could be born in the lower realm? And it was Yan Ji. In his memory, although Yan Ji's strength was not bad, it was impossible for him to be faster than Yi Shaonan and Old Celestial Master. He had actually stepped into the martial immortal realm just like that. Strictly speaking, Yan Ji should have been a martial artist at the same level as Chu Wuji. Chu Wuji did not have time to think so much. He stood up and said in a deep voice, "The cult master Chu is not in the Southern Man Branch Palace. Why did the Windcloud Sword Mound come here?" Yan Ji said indifferently, "Heaven Alliance's Qinqingdi killed my ancestor, Zhongli Mu. Naturally, I came today to take revenge." Don't say you don't know that the Heaven Alliance's martial artists came to the Southern Man Branch Palace of the Kunlun Devil Cult. The Windcloud Sword Mound has no intention of becoming enemies with the Kunlun Devil Cult. As long as the Kunlun devil cult hand over the person, the wind cloud sword mound will immediately retreat. Chu Wuji said in a deep voice, the Heaven Alliance's Qinqing Di has a friendly relationship with the holy cult. I will not hand over this person. Moreover, no one can take him away from the holy cult. Yanji, I don't know how you stepped into the martial immortal realm, but I have to advise you not to be too complacent. You've already destroyed the Heaven Alliance. Are you still going to kill us all? Yanji's face revealed a surprised expression. You actually know about the martial immortal realm? However, soon after, Yanji came to a realization. The foundation of the Kunlun demon sect was frighteningly deep. In fact, Dugu Weiwa himself was a martial immortal level existence. Thus, it was not strange for him to know about this matter. Towards this matter, Yanji wasn't too bothered. He only laughed coldly. Your Kunlun demon sect has done a lot of things like exterminating clans and clans. But today, you're telling me to let people off when possible? What a joke. Since Chu Xiu isn't here, then just as well. Hand him over. Chu Wuji squinted his eyes and said, I've said it before. No one can take anyone away from the holy cult. Not even a martial immortal. Yanji's eyes revealed a hint of coldness. Chu Wuji sneered disdainfully, frog at the bottom of a well. Do you really think that the martial immortal realm is the peak? You don't even have the qualification to see the bigger world. Chu Wuji's disdain was genuine. So what if he was a martial immortal? Yan Beifeng, who was a fourth-layer martial immortal, died in the hands of Chu Xiu. The Blissful Devil Palace, one of the southern region's great demon sects, was also destroyed by Chu Xiu. Although Chu Wuji did not witness the battle in the Middle Province with his own eyes, he had heard that Chu Xiu used only 2 moves to kill the Brahma sect's new martial immortal, Xianxia. So what if he was a martial immortal? His holy cult's cult master Chu had killed more than 1 or 2 martial immortals. Yanji was not qualified to show off in the Kunlun devil cult with just this bit of strength. Chu Wuji's gaze seemed to have pierced Yanji. Yanji's eyes immediately revealed a hint of anger. He swept his hand with a sword energy. The roar of a black dragon shook the entire heaven and earth. It even caused the surrounding chi of heaven and earth to disperse. At that instant, Chu Wuji was certain that his opponent was definitely a martial immortal. Open the formation. Chu Wuji shouted. Actually, before Chu Wuji shouted, Master Yuanji and Chao Shen had already opened the formation. The radiance of the 4 symbols flowed within the green formation. However, the next moment, it was shattered by the sword energy. In an instant, Chao Shen and Master Yuanji's expressions changed. The mission that Chu Xiu gave them was to build a formation that could protect the lower region sub-palace. To Master Yuanji and Chao Shen, a formation that could withstand a peak heaven and earth elemental enlightenment was already powerful enough. Who would have thought that it could not even withstand a single sword attack? The second formation rose again. The power of the 5 elements flowed and changed. Although it was the simplest formation of the 5 elements, it was mutually reinforcing and restraining, fusing and changing. There were hundreds of changes. This formation was built to prevent the opponent from destroying the first formation by relying on numbers. It was a backup plan. However, under Yanji's sword, it shattered once again. It was extremely miserable. Although there was only a fine line of difference between a martial immortal and a peak heaven and earth elemental enlightenment, it was like the difference between heaven and man. Master Yuanji and Chao Shen erected the third formation. This formation shone brightly. There was even a trace of the rootless sacred flame's power within it. This formation was also the last one to protect the sub-palace. It was also the strongest one. If one went deeper, it would be the passageway between the 2 realms. As such, Chao Shen and Master Yuanji used their full strength to fuse a trace of the rootless sacred flame's power into it. When Chu Wuji saw this, he suddenly stood up and went outside the formation. Master Yuanji was shocked when he saw this, and he quickly said, Lord Chu, what are you doing? Chu Wuji said in a deep voice, Are you sure this final formation can withstand a single sword attack from Yanji? If I don't stall for time, who will protect the items in the sub-palace? Master Yuanji knew what Chu Wuji meant. Once this formation was broken, the passageway between the two realms would be exposed to Yanji. Now that Chu Xiu was planning to break the heavenly gates, no one could find out. Yanji looked at Chu Wuji in surprise. Since you know that I'm a martial immortal, you still dare to stand up? Do you want to die? Chu Wuji grinned. Of course I want my life. However, ever since Cult Master Chu took over the holy cult, we have never given in even once. Others can't, and neither can you, Yanji. Now that the cult master isn't here, I'm in charge. If I let you break the sub-palace and take the people away, wouldn't I lose face? After all, I rely on my face to make a living. I can lose my life, but I can't lose my face. The astonishment in Yanji's eyes deepened. He had not expected that there would be such a character in the Kunlun demon sect. You're so stubborn. As Yanji's voice rang out, the black dragon's roar grew louder. The black sword chi pierced through the sun, moon, mountains, and rivers, heading straight for Chu Wuji. The powerful aura was enough to make one's heart tremble. Chu Wuji slashed the crescent blade in his hand. His chi and blood erupted almost at the same time. The powerful force instantly penetrated the crescent blade, causing the blood moon in the sky to shine brightly. Unfortunately, the difference in strength between them was too great. The crescent blade in his hand was shattered in one move. In the next moment, Chu Wuji acted as if he didn't see this scene. He actually took the initiative to rush towards Yanji. His hands formed a seal, and moonlight floated up. Extreme sharpness shone from beneath Yanji's feet as he charged towards him. However, Yanji took a step forward and a powerful aura exploded. It instantly tore the gleam apart. At the same time, a sword aura shot out from his hand and sent Chu Wuji flying again. Chu Wuji's strength was much stronger than Fang Qingtang's. He took a martial immortal expert sword aura head-on and was only seriously injured. He did not die. However, at that moment, Yanji had already descended from the sky. He once again released a sword aura. At this moment, there was a huge fluctuation in the entire southern Man Branch Palace. The rootless sacred flame burst forth and instantly blocked in front of Yanji, causing his sword chi to dissipate completely. Yanji looked at the rootless sacred flame in shock. He recognized it. It was the rootless sacred flame that burned at the peak of Kunlun Mountain. However, the question was, how did the Kunlun devil cult move the rootless sacred flame here? Feeling the power coming from the rootless sacred flame, even with Yanji's current strength, he could not extinguish it. After taking a deep look at Chu Wuji behind the rootless sacred flame, Yanji waved his hand and left with his people. After Yanji left, the rootless sacred flame suddenly extinguished. Master Yuanji and Chaoing walked out from behind the formation. Both of them looked like they had been hollowed out. Chaoing cursed, the formation that took half a year to make is completely ruined. Chapter 1292. Daoist Ocean, Southern Barbarian Jianghu County. When Chu Wuji resisted Yanji, Tangya had already come to the stronghold of Southern Barbarian through the array and sent a message to Chu Xiu with a secret method. However, although there was an array transmission, the news had to be passed from the stronghold of Southern Barbarian to the Nan and Prefecture, and then to Jianghu County. After receiving the news, Chu Xiu suddenly frowned. Previously, he was still planning about the lower realm, but he didn't expect that the lower realm would be in chaos first. The World Alliance was actually breached by the Heartless Sword Tomb. This matter was beyond Chu Xiu's expectation. Of course, what was even more beyond Chu Xiu's expectation was that at this time, there was still someone who dared to provoke his Kunlun devil cult. Did the other party eat bear's heart and leopard's gall? In the intelligence, Tangya only described the other party as a martial immortal according to Chu Wuji's words. But no matter whether the other party was a martial immortal or not, to touch the Kunlun devil cult at this time was courting death. Of course, Chu Xiu couldn't go alone. He had to tell Qinqing Di. Knocking on the door of Qinqing Di's retreat room, Chen Qingdi walked out with a displeased expression. At present, Chen Qingdi was stuck in an extremely mysterious realm between breakthrough and non-breakthrough. He had to comprehend the road ahead by himself. Therefore, he needed to find time to digest the experience and power he obtained in Zhongzhou. At this time, he was interrupted by Chu Xiu, so he was naturally a little unhappy. However, Chen Qingdi also knew that Chu Xiu had always been reliable and calm. There should be some problems for him to suddenly interrupt his retreat. Chu Xiu took a deep breath and said, "Leader Chen, I have something to tell you. You have to be mentally prepared." Chen Qingdi snorted. "Don't worry, I've been through all kinds of storms." "What happened?" Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "Just now, I received news from my subordinates. Yan Ji of the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb is suspected to have broken through the martial immortal realm and destroyed the Heaven Alliance. He even killed Deputy Alliance Master Fang Qingtang. Now, some of the remaining disciples of the World Alliance have fled to the branch hall of my holy sect in the southern barbarian land to seek shelter. That's why I'm here to inform Alliance leader Chen to head down to the lower realm as soon as possible to resolve the crisis." As soon as Chu Xiu spoke, Chen Qingdi's body was instantly enveloped by an explosive force. Chu Xiu saw that the situation was not good, and he instantly retreated a few dozen feet. Wind. Cloud. Sword. Tomb. F***ck your grandma. Every word that Chen Qingdi spat out was like a clap of thunder that resounded between heaven and earth, causing the hearts of those who saw it to go cold. Even the powerful violent force was like a storm, hovering around Chen Qingdi and soaring into the sky. Chu Xiu remained silent. Didn't he say that he had seen great winds and waves? In fact, Chu Xiu also understood Chen Qingdi's feelings at this time. After all, the World Alliance was built by him from scratch. Although with Chen Qingdi's current strength, the power of the World Alliance was no longer of much help to him, it was still the World Alliance, Chen Qingdi's World Alliance. If anything happened to his people, Chu Xiu would not be able to bear it. "Alliance Master Chen, even if you really want to F***ck the grandma of the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb, you have to go to the lower realm first. The forces that I have deployed in the southern barbarian land are far less powerful than the Daoist side. It is still unknown whether they can stop a martial immortal." Chen Qingdi's eyes were red. He followed behind Chu Xiu and went straight to the southern barbarian land. At the same time, he also called Xia Xiaolu. As the successor of the World Alliance, Xia Xiaolu naturally had to know these things. After Xia Xiaolu heard the news, his face was filled with rage and his eyes were already red. Fang Qingtang's death was the most unacceptable to him. Chen Qingdi's way of educating his disciple was basically a filial son under the rod. It was a frustrating education. After teaching, he would let his disciple practice. If he couldn't practice, he would beat him. After beating him, he would practice again. It was simple and violent to the extreme. Only Fang Qingtang was patient and gentle. He would often comfort Xia Xiaolu and patiently teach him some basic martial arts problems. It could even be said that Fang Qingtang was half a master to Xia Xiaolu. Once he died, even Xia Xiaolu, who had always had a good character, was thoroughly furious. When Chu Xiu and Chen Qingdi came to the lower realm, what he saw was Chu Wuji's heavily injured appearance and the southern barbarian branch palace with all the arrays destroyed. At that instant, Chu Xiu's gaze also became gloomy. After checking Chu Wuji's injuries, Chu Xiu immediately sent for the divine Dr. Feng Buping. Chu Wuji weakly waved his hand and said with a smile, "I'm fine. I won't die. I'm not that weak. However, Cult Master Chu, I was injured in the line of duty. Shouldn't you give me 2 more of the special soul crystals you brought back? Not to mention 2, I'll even give you 3. But what exactly happened? That Yan Ji has already stepped into the martial immortal realm? What about the arrays in the southern barbarian branch palace? There are so many arrays, yet they can still injure you?" With that, Chu Xiu turned his gaze to Master Yuan Ji and Chao Shen. The former suddenly shivered. Although the latter always seemed to be unconvinced, under Chu Xiu's intense gaze, he still shivered. Chu Wuji waved his hand and said, "Don't blame them. It's not their problem. Most of the arrays in the lower realm were built under my supervision. I also thought that there would be no problems in the lower realm, so I put most of the power in the Daoist. After all, there are many experts there. Who would have thought that a martial immortal would suddenly appear in the lower realm? Our previous preparations can be said to have been in vain. But fortunately, the two of them changed the arrays at the last minute and stimulated the power of the rootless sacred flame. Otherwise, I would have been really miserable this time." Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "Although the Daoist have many resources and experts, the lower realm is our real foundation. So what if it's a martial immortal? It's not like we haven't killed one before. Go to the Daoist and recuperate. I'll handle the matters in the lower realm. I'll help you take revenge. Count me in." Qinqing Di stood out with a gloomy face and said coldly, "Chu Xiu, don't fight with me this time. Destroy the storm sword tomb and leave it to me." Seeing Qinqing Di's expression, Chu Xiu could only nod. It seemed that the storm sword tomb had really angered Qinqing Di. Actually, the storm sword tomb had indeed gone too far this time. The battle back then, to put it bluntly, was just a quarrel between the younger generation. The storm sword tomb had already broken the rules by letting the older generation take action. Furthermore, Qinqing Di had absolutely shown mercy in that battle. Otherwise, with Qinqing Di's strength, which allowed him to fight against a half-step martial immortal, Zhongli Mu would have been killed by Qinqing Di within 3 punches. In the end, Zhongli Mu had survived for more than a year before he died. It was indeed a bit too much to blame this on Emperor Qinqing. Chu Xiu and Qinqing Di did not directly go to the Storm Sword Tomb for revenge. Instead, they first went to the World Alliance. Although the majority of the World Alliance members had escaped, there were still some who were killed. There were also some who chose to fight to the death, such as Fang Qingting. When Qinqing Di saw Fang Qingting's corpse, there was no longer any expression on his face. After a long while, Qinqing Di extended his hand and closed Fang Qingting's eyes. He said, "Idiot. Why are you trying to be strong when you can't win? Did I save you back then to let you die here?" After saying that, dense killing intent appeared in Qinqing Di's eyes. "Let's go to the Storm Sword Tomb." Chu Xiu and Qinqing Di's movements were not hidden from others. Within the ruins of the World Alliance, there were many anemophilia who were closely watching them. In that period of time, the Storm Sword Tomb's reputation grew. First, they destroyed the World Alliance. Then, they attacked the Kunlun Devil Cult's branch temple in the southern barbaric land. They destroyed the 2 formations of the Kunlun Devil Cult's branch temple and heavily injured Chu Wuji, who was quite famous in the Kunlun Devil Cult. In all these years, they were the only power that dared to attack the Kunlun Devil Cult. Ever since the northern and southern Buddhist sects were destroyed, the righteous sects that had been unable to raise their heads had their spirits lifted. Although this matter had nothing to do with the Kunlun Devil Cult in the beginning, within the Storm Sword Tomb, ever since Yan Ji returned, he had been in seclusion. He had just stepped into the martial immortal realm. In the previous month, he had only barely suppressed his power to the point where it was smooth. In reality, if he wanted to perfectly control the power of the martial immortal realm, he would need around a year's time. However, before long, news came from the outside world. It was said that Qinqing Di and Chu Xiu were heading straight for the Storm Sword Tomb. Of these two, one was an expert who had severely injured the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb and trampled on the dignity of the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb. The other was the Supreme Demon Lord who had destroyed the northern and southern Buddhist sects and dominated the underworld. When these two people attacked together, any sect would feel a mountain-like pressure. However, when the cultivators from the Storm Sword Tomb reported the news, Yan Ji did not respond. He only squinted his eyes and said, "You're finally willing to come out? Perfect, let's deal with them together." Ever since he stepped into the martial immortal realm, Yan Ji's state of mind had changed. Due to the influence of the sword soul, Chu Feng's temperament had become colder. In fact, even his cultivation of a martial immortal gave him the feeling of being a lonely expert. In today's world, how many people were left who were qualified to fight against him and were able to do so? With the strength Qinqing displayed back then, he could be counted as half. With the strength Chu Xiu displayed when he destroyed the northern and southern Buddhist sects, he could also be counted as half. With the two of them added together, they could serve as his whetstones, helping him stabilize his current realm of power. Yan Ji opened his eyes, and within them, there were actually black-colored sword intents. He had sufficient confidence. However, for some unknown reason, Chu Wuji's mocking words from the frog at the bottom of a well were constantly echoing in his mind. It made him feel a bit uncomfortable. At the same time as Yan Ji finished his preparations, the experts from the West Chu martial world, and even the entire Jianghu, hurriedly hurried over to the West Chu martial world. They wanted to witness the battle. The West Chu martial world, which was far away from the Central Plains and incomparably calm, was now boiling. Chapter 1293. Most of the top sects weren't willing to build their sects in bustling areas because it would affect cultivation and it wasn't a good location. Therefore, most of the sects were located in the middle of famous mountains and rivers, which were rather remote. However, the location of Windcloud's sword mound was unusually off. It didn't look like it was in the mountains, but deep in the forest of Zhe country. Looking from afar, Emperor Qinqing and Chu Xiu could already see the appearance of the Windcloud sword mound. It wasn't glorious or majestic. Instead, it was surrounded by trees and buildings, like a huge burial mound. Qinqing sneered, sword mound, it sounds nice. But isn't it just a place to bury people? Don't they like to watch over graves? Fine, today I'll make them pay for it themselves. Qinqing's domineering side was common, but it was rare to see him like this, filled with rage and murderous intent. Obviously, he couldn't wait to punch the people from Windcloud's sword mound into their graves. When Qinqing and Chu Xiu arrived, they didn't see the people from Windcloud's sword mound, but they saw many people from other sections. Shen Baochen from Forgetting Sword Hut, old ancestor from Shangshuaying clan, Ling Yunzi from Chunyang Dao sect, Lu Changlu from Jianghu cult, and even the old celestial master came down with the help of Senior Qing from Longhu mountain. Of course, Senior Qing looked even older than the old celestial master. He didn't look like a Taoist child of the old celestial master, but more like an elder. Many of the remaining sects came, especially those from West Chu. Yi Xiaonan was in seclusion, but East Emperor Tai came. Even the West Chu royal family sent people over, standing behind the crowd in a low-key manner. Chu Xiu looked at the people present and smiled insincerely. Are you all here to watch the show? Chu Xiu's prestige was still there, and no one dared to make a sound. Lu Changlu was the only one who sighed. Cult Master Chu, we'd like to see if we can solve this in a different way. After all, revenge breeds revenge. When will there ever be an end to it? Windcloud's sword tomb and the World Alliance, just because of a small quarrel back then, which couldn't even be considered as a grudge, they actually ended up in such a state. It was truly not worth it. In recent years, the Jianghu has been turbulent, and there have been several big battles. This time, it's best not to fight if we can avoid it. The others looked at Lu Changlu with a strange expression. This person had gone into seclusion many years ago. Now, he had also reached the mysterious realm of heaven and earth. However, it seemed that his brain had become stiff after being in seclusion. How could he still dare to persuade Chu Xiu? In the past, when Chu Xiu wanted to annihilate Sabodi Zen Monastery, Ying family's patriarch and the others went to Kunlun to persuade Chu Xiu. In the end, they were all scolded badly by Chu Xiu and left with their tails between their legs. Just when everyone thought that Lu Changlu would do the same, Chu Xiu calmly explained to Lu Changlu. Sect Master Lu's words are incorrect. You've also said that this matter was caused by an insignificant quarrel. So why are you pursuing this quarrel and not letting it go? It's not Qinqing, it's Windcloud's sword tomb. Also, Yan Ji attacked the Nanman branch of the holy sect. I haven't settled the score with him yet. I, Chu Xiu, am a reasonable person. If people don't offend me, I won't offend them. Of course, The main character today isn't me, but Alliance Master Qin. Sect Master Lu, it's useless even if you persuade me. Can you persuade Alliance Master Qin? When the crowd saw this scene, they were all astonished. Since when did Chu Xiu's temper become so good? He actually calmly explained things to Lu Chenglu. Of course, Chu Xiu wouldn't admit that he was afraid of Ning Xuanji. In the central province, Ning Xuanji had opened a back door for him. This was a favor, and he had to return it no matter what. On the Daoist side, Chu Xiu had no chance to return the favor to Ning Xuanji. So here, he could only return the favor to his disciples and grand disciples. Lu Chenglu silently glanced at Qinqing and sighed. He didn't continue to persuade him. Chu Xiu still looked calm, but on Qinqing's side, as long as one wasn't blind, one could feel the powerful killing intent from Qinqing. It was like a volcano that was about to erupt. When Qinqing put on an unapproachable look, Lu Chenglu knew that he was determined to fight with Storm Sword Tomb. No one could persuade him. Looking at the Storm Sword Mound, Emperor Qinqing took a step forward. The powerful force instantly shook the earth, as if an earth dragon was turning over. That powerful force made everyone's expression change. Little bastards of Storm Sword Tomb, come out and die. At this moment, a thunderous roar caused the sky to change color. In an instant, the sky was covered with dark clouds. Chu Xiu raised his head and looked at the sky. A hint of surprise appeared in his eyes. Qinqing didn't break through in the central province. No one knew where the peak of his path was. However, after the trip to the central province, his strength had obviously improved. Although Qinqing wasn't a martial immortal yet, his strength had reached a level where he could affect a portion of the power of rules. Within Storm Sword Tomb, the roar of a dragon and the cry of a sword resounded. The black dragon's sword intent slashed through the sky, instantly shattering the dark clouds. Yan Ji stepped on the air. Sword energy surrounded his body and stirred the rules, causing the surrounding void to tremble. The Ying family's patriarch and the others looked at Yan Ji with astonishment. Previously, they were still puzzled. They didn't know why Yan Ji would suddenly attack the World Alliance. He even dared to attack the Kunlun Devil Cult's branch palace. Now, they finally understood. Yan Ji had actually taken the final step that they yearned for day and night. All the cultivators in the lower realm who had reached the heaven and earth profound understanding realm wanted to take that final step. The only difference was that some people gave up when they saw that there was no path in front of them. There were also some people like Yi Xiaonan. Even if they knew that their future was bleak, as long as they had a chance, they would walk to the end. If they knew that Yan Ji had taken this step, they would have come here first. No matter what price they had to pay, they had to ask Yan Ji how he had taken this step. But now, whether it was Yan Ji or Qinqing, both sides clearly had no intention of listening to their words. Staring at Qinqing, Yan Ji said coldly, "I thought you would be so afraid that you wouldn't dare to show up. I didn't expect that I had underestimated you. Back then, you were here. You smashed my Storm Sword Tomb's formation with one punch and trampled on my Storm Sword Tomb's dignity. You heavily injured the Patriarch with one punch, causing him to pass away a year later. It can be said that without you, I wouldn't have reached my current realm. Without your actions, the World Alliance wouldn't have been destroyed. Qinqing, do you regret that you were so merciless when you attacked back then?" Qinqing nodded and said emotionlessly, "I do regret it." Everyone was taken aback. Did Qinqing admit defeat? That shouldn't be the case. With their understanding of Qinqing, even if he had truly taken a step to the peak and entered the martial immortal realm, with Qinqing's personality, he wouldn't admit defeat so easily. Then, Qinqing suddenly raised his head. His face was distorted by rage and murderous intent. "I regret that I didn't punch that old bastard to death back then. Why didn't I send all of you bastards from the Storm Sword Tomb to heaven?" As Emperor Qinqing's voice fell, his fist suddenly smashed down. However, this punch was like a falling meteorite, making a deafening explosion. The space trembled, and the primordial qi in the air even exploded and dissipated in an instant. Yan Ji's expression finally changed when he saw how powerful Qianqingdi's punch was. After refining the power of the sword's soul and stepping into the martial immortal realm, Yan Ji actually didn't notice that he felt like a lonely expert. It was a feeling of emptiness brought about by the sudden increase in his power and the fact that he had never seen truly powerful power. So, whether it was against the World Alliance or against Chu Wuji, Yan Ji didn't actually use his full strength. He simply used his strength to crush them. Perhaps in his eyes, those people were no longer worthy of him using his full strength. That was why Chu Wuji said that he was a frog at the bottom of a well. He had obtained the power of the martial immortal realm, but he didn't have the mental state that a martial immortal should have. In the history of the Jianghu, even in the lower realms, there would always be one or two people in every generation who relied on outstanding talent and perseverance to step into the martial immortal realm. However, what they gave up was far more than Yan Ji, who took a shortcut. Regardless of whether it was Yi Shaonan or the old celestial master who stepped into the martial immortal realm, it was likely that their mental state was much more stable than Yan Ji's. So, when Yan Ji saw the power of Qianqingdi's punch, even though he wasn't a martial immortal, his power was close to that of a martial immortal. However, Yan Ji didn't feel the excitement of encountering a worthy opponent. Instead, he felt a bit panicked, as if something that belonged to him had been snatched away. The next moment, Yan Ji tapped between his eyebrows. Black light flowed and a black longsword appeared from between his eyebrows. The black longsword was in the shape of a dragon. The hilt was the head of a dragon, the body of the sword was the body of a dragon, and the tip of the sword was the tail of a dragon. This was a longsword formed by the sword soul. The sword intent it exuded was so dense that no divine weapon would be able to contain it. As the sword stabbed forward, the sound of the sword and the dragon's roar resounded through the sky. The surrounding spiritual energy began to distort, transforming into boundless sword aura that instantly enveloped Qianqingdi. A series of sword cries and explosions rang out. Not a single figure could be seen in the sky, only boundless sword chi. Everyone's expressions changed slightly. Even they had to expend a lot of effort to block Yan Ji's attack. However, the might of the countless sword auras condensing and taking the final step. Was it really that terrifying? Chu Xiu stood with his hands behind his back. There wasn't the slightest bit of worry in his eyes. Qianqingdi's strength was already enough to defeat a half-step martial immortal. And now, even if he were to face a real martial immortal, Chu Xiu was still confident in him. Moreover, even though he didn't know how Yan Ji reached the martial immortal realm, he could feel that Yan Ji's aura was a bit unstable, as if he hadn't completely understood the realm. Chapter 1294. It was the same realm, but the power brought about by different ways of breaking through was also different. Chu Xiu's speed of breaking through was very fast, but he rarely had a situation where his foundation was unstable. That was because before Chu Xiu broke through, he often challenged those in a higher realm than him. He was actually very familiar with that realm. Yan Ji was different. He knew nothing about martial immortal realm. Perhaps there were records of martial immortals in the Storm Sword Tomb, but there shouldn't be many. There were also no detailed descriptions or cultivation methods. That was why Yan Ji was in such a situation. He clearly had the power that martial immortal realm should have, but he didn't have the mental state to truly control that power. At that moment, in mid-air, the powerful black dragon sword aura in Yan Ji's hand attacked as if it covered the sky. However, Qianqingdi didn't dodge it. His fist took the sword aura head-on and smashed down. Qianqingdi's body was burning fiercely with real fire of internal power. It even caused the surrounding space to distort. The powerful sword aura was first weakened by the real fire of internal power. The remaining portion was directly taken by Qianqingdi's body. Most people in Jianghu only knew that Qianqingdi's power was extremely powerful, but they neglected that Qianqingdi's body was also incomparably powerful. However, most of the time, he was the one beating others up and not the other way around. So, that was often overlooked. The sword aura in Yan Ji's eyes soared into the sky. The black dragon sword spirit in his hand roared and he slashed down from the sky. In an instant, everything in the world, including the surrounding primordial chi, and even a portion of the power of rules, all turned into swords and slashed towards Qinqing Di. The powerful power of martial immortal realm twisted the rules. The power that exploded in that instant made everyone raise their eyebrows. Qinqing Di was sent flying. However, at that moment, Chu Xiu was certain that Yan Ji did step into martial immortal realm by accident. Although he was a genuine martial immortal, the abilities that he had used were all basic abilities. He did not possess any divine abilities. In fact, he did not even possess the martial skills that a martial immortal should possess. In fact, even his martial path was still at the profound understanding realm. He was only able to control the surrounding heaven and earth, and was not able to skillfully utilize the power of laws like martial immortals. Although there was indeed some nomological power left in his sword, it was just some instinct. Qinqing Di was blasted away by a sword stained with the power of rules, but he just shook his head as if nothing had happened. He rushed forward again and punched again. Yan Ji frowned, and the black dragon sword in his hand flew out, transforming into a black dragon that was hundreds of feet long. As Yan Ji formed a seal, the dragon's tail suddenly lashed out. It was as if Mount Tai was pressing down, but it contained boundless sharpness. Although Yan Ji did not possess a martial path or martial skills that were compatible with the martial immortal realm, the black dragon sword spirit he refined was formed by the true spirits and sword spirits of countless sword experts in the sword tomb over 1,000 years. In terms of the path of the sword, it had countless transformations. However, Qinqing Di's fist still landed. Although his arm was lacerated by the extreme sharpness, his expression and the power of his fist did not change in the slightest. Immovable as a mountain. Qinqing Di's state of mind was firm, and the power of his fist was steady. It was like a towering mountain towering above the earth. Unless one was able to chop the towering mountain in half, no damage would cause him to waver. Chu Xiu silently observed from below. He did not have the slightest intention to make a move. Although it was very simple for him to take care of Yan Ji with his current strength, the storm sword tomb was left for Qinqing Di to vent his anger. He had no intention of overstepping his boundaries. Besides, from Chu Xiu's perspective, Yan Ji was about to lose because his heart was in a mess. As Qinqing Di's punches landed, no matter how the black dragon sword spirit in Yan Ji's hand changed, it could not destroy it. No matter how many changes the black dragon sword spirit had, it was not a martial skill. Qinqing Di responded to the changes by remaining unchanged. In the end, the first to give in was Yan Ji himself. "Are you done? Is this all you've got?" Qinqing Di coldly stared at Yan Ji. At that instant, the gold-and-silver true energy fire around Qinqing Di's body suddenly changed. It started to emit a red glare, as dazzling as the sun. The next instant, Qinqing Di still threw a punch. However, that punch seemed to have passed through countless spaces. The scorching red glare burned all the power of rules. It ignored space, ignored time. The punch was thrown, and the punch was thrown. It was completed in almost an instant. With a loud explosion, Yan Ji was sent flying. He spat out a mouthful of blood and his eyes revealed an expression of disbelief. "I'm actually injured? I've already stepped into the legendary realm. Why can't I defeat Qinqing Di?" The 3 generations of Wind Cloud Sword Tomb have been studying and waiting, but in the end, I still can't defeat Qinqing Di's punch. Chu Xiu squinted his eyes. Qinqing Di had actually broken through. The path that Qinqing Di took was different from ordinary warriors. No matter how strong his physical body was, he could not control the power of rules. Therefore, there was only one way for him to defeat a martial immortal, and that was to use his strength to break the rules. If you can control the rules, I can break the rules. In this way, a martial immortal would have no advantage in front of Qinqing Di. The true energy fire around Qinqing Di's body burned fiercely. Any power of rules in front of him was like an illusion. They were shattered in an instant. In just a few punches, although Qinqing Di's power was greatly consumed, Yanji was already spitting out blood. When the others saw this, they couldn't help but want to make a move. In fact, their relationship with Windcloud Sword Tomb wasn't that good. Even though they were also from the 5 great sword sects, Windcloud Sword Tomb rarely interacted with them. However, the strength that Yanji displayed right now was the realm that they dreamed of. Therefore, they didn't want Qinqing to kill Yanji. At the very least, they wanted to keep him alive and ask him how he stepped into this realm. However, at this moment, Chu Xiu waved his hand. The saber light in the air twisted. There was saber intent, but there was no saber shape. In front of everyone's eyes, the ground was torn open. It was so deep that they couldn't see the bottom. It was like an abyss. Seeing this scene and feeling the fluctuation of power, everyone's expression changed. Martial immortal. Another martial immortal. Compared to Yanji, Chu Xiu was even stronger. His control over the power of rules was more skillful. They couldn't understand it, but they could clearly feel the power. In an instant, the eyes of the Ying family's old ancestor and the others were filled with unwillingness. There was even a hint of jealousy. They had been searching for this realm for their entire lives, but they couldn't see the path ahead. It was fine that Yanji had stepped into this realm, but why did Chu Xiu, who was younger than Yanji, also step into this realm? Looking at the crowd, Chu Xiu smiled coldly and said, "Everyone, I've said it before. This time, it's a matter between the World Alliance and the Windcloud Sword Tomb. I won't interfere, but you guys shouldn't interfere either." Everyone present silently retracted their footsteps. They yearned for the legendary power of a martial immortal, but they didn't want to experience it. At that moment, the only power of rules that Yanji could rely on had been shattered by Qinqing. His defeat was already decided. Looking at Qinqing, all the anger, hatred, and unwillingness in Yanji's heart surged. At that instant, he formed a seal with his hand and the black dragon sword soul suddenly entered between his eyebrows. In an instant, his entire body was surrounded by a pitch-black sword aura. He roared at the sky and a black sword ray soared into the sky. Its might instantly increased by several times. Chu Xiu looked at Yanji in surprise. He really didn't expect Yanji to fight with his life on the line. Although Qinqing had an epiphany during the battle and could shatter the rules, he couldn't control them. Therefore, as long as Yanji used the power of rules to escape, Qinqing wouldn't be able to catch up to the speed of a martial immortal. Of course, Chu Xiu would definitely try to stop him, but who would have thought Yanji would choose to fight with his life on the line? Qinqing sneered and said, "You're ready to fight with your life on the line? Or do you think you can defeat me by fighting with your life on the line? You're worse than that old guy Zhonglimu. That old guy knows himself well, but you can't see yourself clearly. Die." Yanji merged with the sword soul. In an instant, the sword slashed down and Yanji's body turned into a huge black dragon that was hundreds of feet long. It descended with an overwhelming killing intent. In an instant, space was torn apart and the power of rules was used to the extreme. Even cracks appeared on Yanji's body. It was an incomparably tragic scene. Qinqing let out a long breath. The scarlet true fire of inner power around his body was withdrawn. He floated in the air and not a single strand of astral energy leaked out from his body. A punch slowly smashed down. Its speed was extremely slow, but in the eyes of the crowd, it seemed to be in slow motion. But in reality, it wasn't slow. It was because Qinqing's punch was no longer restricted by the power of rules. The black dragon sword soul slashed down in an overwhelming manner. Qinqing's entire body was shrouded in the boundless sharpness. However, all of his power was restrained within his body. No matter how the sword chi slashed at him, the punch landed firmly, as if nothing could stop him. Cracks appeared on Qinqing's body, but he seemed to be unaware of it. He passed through the countless slashes of the sword chi. The punch that did not contain any astral energy erupted with the purest fluctuation of power. Time seemed to have stopped in an instant. In the next moment, it suddenly erupted. Everyone present was dumbfounded as they looked at the sky. The huge black dragon that was hundreds of feet long began to shatter inch by inch. Then, it completely dissipated. Yanji's sword soul was the same as the black dragon's sword soul. It completely dissipated and not even his corpse was left behind. The people below were all dumbfounded and couldn't accept this. That was the legendary martial immortal, a realm above the peak. He died just like that? How long had it been since he broke through and he died? Of course, they hadn't seen the scene of Chu Xiu killing Xianxia. If there was a ranking of martial immortals who died the fastest, Xianxia would probably be ranked first among the Daoist. Chapter 1295. He killed Yanji with one punch and broke through the limit of power, but there was no joy in Qingdi's eyes. Yanji died, but Fang Qingding couldn't be resurrected, and the Dead World Alliance martial artists couldn't be resurrected either. Chu Xiu frowned and said, "You're injured." Qingdi waved his hand and said, "It's okay, I'll leave the rest to you." Aren't they called sword tomb? Well, let's bury them all in the tomb. Chu Xiu nodded and said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of the rest." With that said, Chu Xiu waved his hand, but Tangye and others came out of nowhere and began to attack Wind Cloud Sword Tomb. Qingdi's revenge was completed, but for Chu Wuji's revenge, Chu Xiu hadn't taken revenge yet. This time, the other martial artists present didn't stop them. They had dealt with Chu Xiu for a long time. They knew that when Chu Xiu wanted to kill, they couldn't stop him. However, seeing a big sect destroyed in the hands of Chu Xiu, they felt a chill in their hearts. Since Chu Xiu destroyed the North and South Buddhist sects last time, Kunlun devil cult had been very low-key. Even Chu Xiu rarely appeared in the underworld. They once thought that Chu Xiu restrained his temper after stepping into heaven and earth mystic opening and devoted himself to martial arts, just like Yi Xiaonan. This also made them relieved. But today, Chu Xiu and Qingdi destroyed Wind Cloud Sword Tomb with absolute power, which made them a little scared. Especially those under Chu Xiu. Tangye brought very few people this time, less than 100 people. They were all the martial artists who were responsible for guarding the lower realm. But the problem was that the strength of these people was a bit abnormal. The weakest was actually the real pellet state. Even in a big family like the Shangshuang clan, the real pellet state is also the elder deacon of the family and the backbone of the family. However, in the Kunlun devil cult, he is just an ordinary disciple. Could it be that these people were secretly trained by the Kunlun devil cult? Looking at the people present, Chu Xiu said indifferently, "Everyone, what are you waiting for? If you don't treat me well during the period of extermination, I won't take care of your meals." The Wind Cloud Sword Tomb was destroyed not because I was overbearing, but because the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb was too arrogant. Beyond the heaven and earth profound understanding is the peak. There is always a higher mountain. The true peak is still very far away. Everyone, please disperse. I reckon it won't be long before we meet again. Chu Xiu's words confused everyone present. If it wasn't the peak, then what was it? Although Chu Xiu stepped into the martial immortal realm, no one dared to ask how Chu Xiu stepped into this realm. What they cared more about was Chu Xiu's last sentence. What does it mean that we will meet again soon? What is Chu Xiu going to do? By the time everyone had left, Tangye had already finished his battle. As soon as Yanji died, the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb no longer had the courage to fight, and Chu Xiu found that he had overestimated the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb. In terms of sword cultivation, these guys who spent most of their time cultivating in the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb were indeed extraordinary. But this also meant that the things they had experienced were too little, and their state of mind was a little fragile. The number of people who surrendered reached 70%. Chu Xiu didn't waste those people. He pulled them all back to build the Southern Barbarian Branch Palace. Previously, the three formations of the Southern Barbarian Branch Palace were destroyed by Yanji. Master Yuanji and Chao Shen pondered over the painful experience and prepared to strengthen the formations by another level. So, while laying the formations, they also needed a large number of cultivators to provide energy, polish the formation materials, and so on. These things were handed over to them. After everyone was dealt with, Chu Xiu and Qinqing stepped into the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb and looked around. To most people, the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb was indeed mysterious enough. Many rogue sword cultivators would even choose to bring their own swords into the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb's bottomless ruin. The Wind Cloud Sword Tomb wasn't the starting point of the sword path, but it was the ending point. However, when Qinqing and Chu Xiu arrived before the real tomb, they were a bit disappointed. Because countless sword cultivators and broken swords were buried within the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb, the power it gave birth to was indeed extremely astonishing. Sword energy filled the air. But this power was mixed with too much evil aura. Moreover, there were quite a lot of impurities, so it wasn't too suitable for cultivation. Moreover, in the eyes of Qinqing and Chu Xiu, it wasn't too powerful. After all, they had seen the Daoist Divine Palace, the place where the laws of two worlds twisted. A mere Wind Cloud Sword Tomb wasn't enough to make them make a fuss. But just at that moment, in Chu Xiu's mind, the demon in his heart suddenly said, "There's something in the deepest part of the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb." Chu Xiu was taken aback. What was it that was buried so deep? Even with his current primordial spirit power, he couldn't detect it. He extended his hand and grabbed. The space within the laws twisted, and in the deepest part of the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb, a black dragon the size of a thumb, emitting astonishing sword energy, was caught by Chu Xiu. The power on it was the same as the power on Yanji's body. Clearly, he had relied on the thing born from the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb to become a martial immortal. The power this little thing gave birth to isn't strong. Yanji relied on it to become a martial immortal? The demon said, "Of course not. It should only be a seed, the seed of a sword soul. Only by absorbing the powerful sword energy and other powers of the Wind Cloud Sword Tomb can it become a sword soul." Chu Xiu raised his brows and put it away. Of course, he wasn't interested in keeping it for over 1,000 years to give birth to some sword soul. But a single seed was still a decent treasure. At that moment, Qinqing suddenly said, "Cult Master Chu, there's something I want to talk to you about." Chu Xiu was slightly taken aback. He felt that there was something wrong with Qinqing's tone. Chu Xiu and Qinqing had known each other for a long time. Back when he was still a young hero on the Longhu list, he had already known Qinqing. Moreover, he and Xie Xiaolu were good friends. So, all along, Qinqing gave off the feeling of a senior. But now, Qinqing's tone was very formal. That feeling was different from before. "Alliance Master Qin, please speak your mind." Qinqing let out a long breath and said, "I want to merge the World Alliance with the Kunlun Devil cult." Chu Xiu was taken aback. He didn't expect Qinqing to talk to him about that. One must know that as long as the Heaven Alliance had Emperor Qinqing, it would be sufficient for the Heaven Alliance to flourish. Also, given the relationship between him and Emperor Qinqing, both parties were allies. No matter how the Kunlun demon sect developed, it would never threaten the Heaven Alliance. So, why did Qinqing want to merge the World Alliance with the Kunlun Devil cult? Qinqing sighed and said, "This time, the World Alliance's fall is actually a lesson. I'm not as good as you, Cult Master Chu, who fought and advanced in the underworld and had many experts by your side. Actually, I'm not qualified to be a leader because I'm too strong. I'm so strong that I've already broken away from the World Alliance, causing it to become dispensable. But it's a foundation that I built from scratch. I don't want to give it up, so it became what it is today. I can deal with the karmic opponents that I've provoked, but the forces under me can't. There are many experts in the Kunlun Devil cult. You can make the entire Kunlun Devil cult dominate the underworld. That's why I said that I'm not as good as you. But I don't want to give up on those who are still alive in the World Alliance. Give me a hall in the Kunlun Devil cult. From now on, there will be no World Alliance in the underworld. There will only be the World Hall under the Kunlun Devil cult. If you have any trouble with the Daoist Ocean, you can ask me for help. But don't expect me to stay in the Kunlun devil cult during normal times. How about it? Do you accept my world alliance? Chu Xiu did not even hesitate as a smile appeared on his face, of course. From now on, Alliance Leader Qin, no, Hall Master Qin, will be a family with our holy sect. However, the position of a Hall Master is a little low. After I reorganize the Kunlun Demon sect, I will rearrange the ranking. Given Qinqingdi's strength, the strength of Chu Xiu's side would skyrocket if he joined. Moreover, even though the World Alliance was born in the wilderness and didn't seem strong, it was because Qinqingdi wasn't too concerned about it. The World Alliance's foundation was too shallow. It was still a wilderness sect, so it lacked cultivation resources and a cultivation environment. It was normal for them to be weak. But after joining the Kunlun devil cult, they didn't have to worry about it anymore. This was a good thing that was delivered to his doorstep. If Chu Xiu rejected it, he would be out of his mind. Chu Xiu didn't have any ideas about the World Alliance in the past because he was very law-abiding and had a bottom line. Rabbits don't eat the grass near their burrows. He was already so familiar with Xie Xiaolu and Qinqingdi. It wasn't very kind of him to annex their forces. But now that Qinqingdi took the initiative to come to his doorstep, he wouldn't be polite anymore. Qinqingdi waved his hand casually. What hall leader or demon lord? It's just a title. I don't care about it. Lu Jiang, he has been eyeing the position of the 4 demon lords for hundreds of years. It's almost become an obsession. You should give it to him. Oh right, what were you guys plotting previously? All of you were so mysterious. At that time, Chu Xiu and the others were discussing attacking the heavenly gates. Qinqingdi was tactful and didn't participate. Actually, he was also very curious. Since they were on the same side now, it wasn't a big deal to talk about it. When Chu Xiu told him about his plan to attack the heavenly gates, Qinqingdi's eyes lit up. The name Jun Wuxian of the heavenly gates didn't scare Qinqingdi. Instead, it made him excited. It was Qinqingdi's dream to be able to exchange blows with an expert of this level. So, you're going to attack the heavenly gates after Shang Tianliang and the others come out of seclusion? Chu Xiu squinted his eyes and said, there's no rush. Before attacking the heavenly gates, I need to borrow strength. There's a secret realm in the heavenly gates that nurtures god generals. The combat power there isn't weak. I don't want to use all the resources I've accumulated to fight against the heavenly gates. Then, what are you going to do? Chu Xiu looked outside and said calmly, there are many forces that can be used in the underworld. Chapter 1296. Chu Xiu had the confidence to fight to the death with Elysium, and he was 100% sure that he could defeat Elysium. In the past few years, all of Chu Xiu's men had been rotated to the Daoist, and their strength had skyrocketed. The advantage of Elysium was that their mystic realm was the closest to the Daoist, so it would be affected by the Daoist's rules of power, and its vitality was richer. But that was only in comparison. Chu Xiu came directly to the Daoist, which was like cheating. Not to mention that Chu Xiu controlled the barbarians of the southern barbaric land, and he was also the governor of the Imperial Sky Pavilion. In the huge southern barbaric land, Chu Xiu was basically the local tyrant, and all kinds of resources were under his control. With so many things in hand, if he couldn't beat a mystic realm of Elysium, it would be a joke. It was just that Chu Xiu's habit was to use the smallest price to do everything. Only knowing how to rush forward like a fool was not Chu Xiu's style. Qinqingdi waved his hand, these plots and tricks. You're good at plotting, so I won't participate. Just call me when it's time to make a move. Chu Xiu nodded silently. Qinqingdi was the standard foolhardy style of doing things, but it was also a kind of ability to be reckless all the way until now. After emptying the wind cloud sword tomb, Chu Xiu first told Tangya to go back to the Daoist, and told the others to immediately return to the lower realm after coming out of seclusion, and to bring back 90% of the people. As for Chu Xiu, he went to find someone, Donghuang Tai. In the West Chu forest, Dong Wang Tai turned into a cloud of black mist and quickly flew through the air, but his heart was filled with many thoughts. Long before Chu Xiu entered the Daoist realm, Dong Wang Tai had already stepped into the mysterious realm of heaven and earth. Moreover, his power was extremely profound, so after he deduced the martial arts of the true fire spiritual cultivation realm to the extreme, he naturally stepped into the mysterious realm of heaven and earth. He directly skipped the early stage, and his power was already complete, just like Lu Jianghe back then. However, he was still filled with reverence and yearning for the martial immortal realm. Yet, on that day, he actually personally witnessed the death of a martial immortal. This was an enormous shock to Dong Wang Tai. Just as his mind was in a mess, a voice suddenly came from behind him. Dong Wang Tai, no matter what, we're old friends. I told those righteous people to scram, but I didn't say you could leave. Why aren't you catching up with me after watching the show? Dong Wang Tai's body shuddered and he flew out of the black mist. He was so frightened that he almost fell to the ground. He looked at Chu Xiu, who was slowly walking through the air behind him. There was a 30% fear in his eyes, a 30% vigilance, a 30% stupefaction, and a 10% confusion. That person's name shook the Jianghu. To be more precise, his infamy spread throughout the Jianghu. Whoever saw him take the initiative to look for him had the same expression. Moreover, when had he ever been friends with Chu Xiu? He didn't even know. After calming himself down, Dong Wang Tai clasped his hands and said, Cult Master Chu's divine might is matchless. Those righteous cultivators left with their tails between their legs. Naturally, I have to go back and report to the cult master. As Dong Wang Tai spoke, he cursed inwardly. Chu Xiu was the cult master of the Kunlun devil cult. Yi Xiaonan was the cult master of the moon-worshipping cult. Furthermore, the moon-worshipping cult was of the bright demon lineage. He couldn't be thinking of attacking the moon-worshipping cult and leaving only one cult master in the Jianghu, could he? Chu Xiu didn't know Dong Wang Tai had so many thoughts in his mind. He said indifferently, I just wanted to pay a visit to cult master Yi Xiaonan. If I'm not mistaken, cult master Yi should have stepped into the martial immortal realm, right? Dong Wang Tai's heart immediately trembled. Although he controlled it very well, and even his gaze didn't change much, with Chu Xiu's current strength, he could clearly feel the undulations coming from his body. Dong Wang Tai wanted to deny it, but when he saw Chu Xiu's determined gaze, he knew he couldn't hide it. So, Dong Wang Tai could only force a smile and say, how did Cult Master Chu know that? Chu Xiu smiled and said, if there's anyone in the Jianghu who's most likely to step into the martial immortal realm, it's definitely Cult Master Yi. Yan Ji, a guy who relied on external forces, could step into the martial immortal realm. Cult Master Yi naturally can't be any worse. I remember that Cult Master Yi has been refining the natural demon seed for a very long time. Even without the natural demon seed, I believe Cult Master Yi can also take this step. Don't be nervous. The Jianghu now doesn't differentiate between the hidden demon clan and the demon clan. We're all people of the demon clan. What Cult Master Yi pursues doesn't conflict with what I pursue, so we won't be enemies. Although Chu Xiu told Dong Wang Tai not to be nervous, how could he not be? Although he still couldn't figure out what Chu Xiu's goal was, since Chu Xiu had spoken, he could only bring Chu Xiu back to the moon-worshipping cult. After Chu Xiu entered the moon-worshipping sect, the moon-worshipping sect's high priest, who already looked a bit old, and a few other divine magus priests came to greet Chu Xiu. However, Chu Xiu was a bit puzzled. He asked, where's the saintess of the moon-worshipping cult? Dong Wang Tai hesitated for a moment before saying, she's undergoing a tribulation. Chu Xiu was stunned. Undergoing a tribulation? A saintess undergoing a tribulation? However, Dong Wang Tai didn't say it directly. Instead, he looked at the high priest, unsure if he should say it or not. The high priest of moon-worshipping cult snorted coldly and said, it's all in the past. Some people in the devil path vaguely know about it. What's the point of hiding it from Cult Master Chu? Dong Wang Tai sighed and said, undergoing a tribulation is actually the tribulation of the inherited parasite poison. Speaking of which, it also involves some of the moon-worshipping cult's disgraceful past. The position of the saintess of the moon-worshipping cult has always been passed down. You know this, Cult Master Chu. However, in the Gu lineage, the saintess was the first to master it. All the Gu techniques of the moon-worshipping cult's disciples were passed down by the first saintess. In the beginning, the moon-worshipping cult didn't have a high priest or even 9 divine magi. Only the saintess controlled everything. At that time, the moon-worshipping cult was still very weak, so the first saintess researched a kind of Gu for inheritance. It was called the longevity Gu. The saintess can die, but the longevity Gu won't. Therefore, every generation of saintess will use their own blood and sweat to refine the longevity Gu and obtain its inheritance. Therefore, it's possible for the saintess to have a sudden burst of strength and cross several realms. Chu Xiu nodded in understanding, but at the same time, he was waiting for the next part. There was no free lunch in this world. If the effect of the longevity Gu was really that strong, the moon-worshipping cult would have long been the world's #1 sect. Sure enough, Dong Wang Tai sighed and continued, it's just that after a long time, the moon-worshipping cult discovered that the longevity Gu can't really live forever. Its so-called longevity is actually just devouring the blood and lifespan of every generation saintess. Therefore, every generation saintess has a very short life. It has nothing to do with realms, because when feeding the longevity Gu, a large part of their lifespan has already been plundered. And every time the inheritance is passed down, the longevity Gu will leave the mark of the previous generation saintess. The moon-worshipping cult has been passed down for thousands of years, and there are already hundreds of saintess marks left behind. If too many of these marks are accumulated, it will become extremely dangerous to break through during the inheritance. Of the previous 3 generations of saintess, one had her primordial spirit torn apart during the inheritance and died. Another was seriously injured, and only one managed to survive. So now, the longevity Gu is no longer a Gu, but a Gu poison. A Gu poison that harms others and oneself. Chu Xiu nodded lightly. He didn't ask why the moon-worshipping cult continued to use the longevity Gu even though they knew it was a Gu poison. Since the saintess was the ruler of the moon-worshipping cult in the early days, it was conceivable how strong the inheritance she left behind was. Moreover, every generation's saintess was basically an outstanding figure on the Longhu list. It was not a problem to break through the real pellet state, and it was only a matter of time to step into the true fire spirit refinement state. Therefore, the power brought by the longevity Gu was likely to help her directly step into the heaven and earth mystic connecting state. Otherwise, it would be meaningless. In the mortal realm, any powerhouse of the heaven and earth mystic connecting state was a supreme level character. Would the moon-worshipping cult give up this kind of power? Even if no one forced them, there would probably be people who would take the initiative to feed the longevity Gu with their blood and sweat. Although the moon-worshipping cult was now strong enough to not lack a saintess, it was obvious that this kind of thing was inevitable. Chu Xiu didn't say much, and he said in a deep voice, "Take me to see Master Yi." Dong Wang Tai only brought Chu Xiu to the back mountain and left. Yi Xiaonan was dressed in black and stood barefoot on the top of the mountain. "Master Yi, long time no see." Congratulations to Master Yi for stepping into the martial immortal realm. Yi Xiaonan turned his head. The aura he exuded was that of the martial immortal realm. Furthermore, Yi Xiaonan's martial artist was a genuine martial immortal, different from Yan Ji, who relied on external power to support himself. Yi Xiaonan had already completely grasped the power of laws. Even his aura was extremely stable and solid. He was unexpectedly at the second heavenly layer like Chu Xiu, and not the first heavenly layer that he had just entered. Obviously, Yi Xiaonan had been breaking through for a long time, but he had been holding back and concentrating on stabilizing his realm. At this time, looking at Chu Xiu, Yi Xiaonan's eyes flashed with excitement. Chu Xiu had been in contact with Yi Xiaonan many times. Whether it was when Yi Xiaonan was besieged by the Righteous Alliance or when he seized the demonic seed, he had never seen Yi Xiaonan's emotions fluctuate so much. "You actually also stepped into this realm." What Yi Xiaonan pursued was the pinnacle of power. He once thought that after stepping into the profound understanding of heaven and earth and breaking the barrier between heaven and man, he would be at the peak. In the end, when he truly reached this realm, and compared it with the aura Jun Wuxian and Zhong Xinxiu showed in the past, he knew that he was still far from the peak. But today, when he saw Chu Xiu, he didn't have the feeling of meeting an old friend. He only had a feeling of excitement that he was not alone after seeing someone of the same trade. Yi Xiaonan reached out and grabbed. He didn't directly greet Chu Xiu, but his grab directly tore the void around Chu Xiu. A storm immediately swept towards Chu Xiu. Chapter 1297. Yi Xiaonan's sudden attack didn't carry any killing intent. It was obvious that he hadn't fought with an existence in the martial immortal realm since his breakthrough, so he wanted to try the real power of the rule. Chu Xiu suddenly stepped forward, and boundless sharpness bloomed around him. But looking closely, those sharpness were like blades, tearing the surrounding storm apart and using the power of the rule to counteract the power of the rule. At the next moment, the surrounding torn space started to close up, but Chu Xiu was forcefully trapped within it. After Yi Xiaonan entered the martial immortal realm and merged with the power of the rule, the power of the Heaven-Mending Heart Sutra became even more varied than before. Chu Xiu used his palm as a blade, and the power of the rule twisted into a line in his hand. It slashed down like an extreme blade, and in an instant, heaven and earth were torn apart. Yi Xiaonan only used these two moves to test his power, and then he didn't attack again. He stared at Chu Xiu and said, "I'm surprised that you can reach this realm. In terms of power, you aren't any worse than me." Chu Xiu said indifferently, "There are many accidents in this world. It's not surprising that I ran into one. But hierarchy, your habit of attacking first is not good. You have to change it." Yi Xiaonan ignored Chu Xiu's teasing. He waved his hand, and a stone stool rose under him and Chu Xiu at the same time. After sitting down, he asked, "Why are you looking for me?" Chu Xiu also sat down and said in a deep voice, "Join forces with the moon-worshipping cult to attack the gate of heaven and kill Jun Wuxian." There was no surprise in Yi Xiaonan's eyes. He just looked up at Chu Xiu and said two words, "Reason." In the past, he had promised Chu Xiu to help him as a shield, just to see Jun Wuxian attack. But at that time, what he pursued was the martial immortal realm. Now that Yi Xiaonan had reached this realm, he also knew that martial immortal was not the peak. However, he relied on himself to cultivate step by step to reach this stage. In the lower realm, he relied on himself to break through the barrier between heaven and man and become a martial celestial. It was not something that Yan Ji, who relied on external objects to become a false martial celestial, could compare to. Therefore, Yi Xiaonan was not Yan Ji. He was very clear about his own future and his own path ahead. He no longer needed to observe others to advance. He was the moon-worshipping cult leader, so he naturally had to consider the entire moon-worshipping cult when it came to such a big matter. The east and west heavens, the incomparably mysterious and powerful heavenly gates, were not easy to attack. Chu Xiu extended two fingers and said, "I have two reasons. First, has Cult Master Yi heard of where the cultivators went during the great calamity of the ancient era?" Yi Xiaonan nodded and said, vaguely. This kind of thing was just a legend for other Jianghu people, but for a powerhouse like Yi Xiaonan who stood at the peak of the Jianghu, it was not a rare thing. Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "Then I will tell you a piece of news now. The heavenly gates were left behind by the ancient cultivators in the past to guard the passage between the two realms. The heavenly gates, as the name suggests, are the gates to heaven. The other heaven is stronger than the lower realm's primordial qi, and it is closer to heaven than the lower realm. As long as the heavenly gates are destroyed and the formation is destroyed, the primordial qi of the other heaven will seep into the lower realm. Cult Master Yi, you should know what will happen when the time comes." Hearing this, Yi Xiaonan's eyes could not help but reveal a look of surprise. Of course, he knew that this would create a new golden age of martial arts. Of course, there was one thing that Chu Xiu did not say. As long as the formation in the lower realm was damaged, the formation on the Daoist side should not be able to hold on for long. Therefore, after the golden age of martial arts, it might cause the Daoist and the lower realm to be connected. But it did not matter. Chu Xiu had already enjoyed the benefits of the Daoist. The cultivators under his command had all ushered in a wave of surge in strength in the Daoist. After adapting to the primordial qi of the heaven and earth, their cultivation speed had also become flat. Although it was still faster than the lower realm, there would not be such a surge. Therefore, now Chu Xiu only wanted to destroy the heavenly gates and the yang ability source in the heavenly gates. Other things were not within the scope of his consideration. Chu Xiu continued, as for the second reason, that is that the master of the heavenly gates, Jun Wuxian, has been seriously injured. Yi Xiaonan looked at Chu Xiu with a trace of doubt. The heavenly gates rarely stepped out of Jianghu. It should be said that the heavenly gates was the most mysterious sect in Jianghu. So, how did Chu Xiu know that Jun Wuxian had been seriously injured? Chu Xiu smiled and said, I know that what I said now is empty talk, and there is no evidence. But I still have some credibility in Jianghu. At least I did not deceive the moon-worshipping cult and cult master Yi. There is still a long time before the general attack on the heavenly gates. I think that it is not only the moon-worshipping cult that will cooperate with us. When the time comes, the moon-worshipping cult can bring people to see if what I said is true. If what I said is false, cult master Yi can just turn around and leave with your people. It is also fine. Yi Xiaonan only hesitated for a moment, then nodded and said, yes. Although Yi Xiaonan did not need to seek a breakthrough in order to fight with Jun Wuxian, he did not want to give up the opportunity to fight with an expert like Jun Wuxian. At this time, the moon-worshipping cult's high priest hurriedly walked over and said, Cult master, it's bad. The holy maiden's spirit was swallowed by the longevity goo. I'm afraid that she can't survive the inheritance this time. Yi Xiaonan frowned, his figure moved, and he directly disappeared on the spot. The moon-worshipping cult's high priest looked at Chu Xiu somewhat awkwardly. The guest was still here, and the cult master left. What about Chu Xiu? I also have a lot of dealings with your moon-worshipping cult's holy maiden. How about letting me go and take a look? Chu Xiu suddenly said. Since this matter was already known by Chu Xiu, then there was nothing to hide. The moon-worshipping cult's high priest also directly brought Chu Xiu to a secret room in the back mountain of the moon-worshipping cult. At this time, in that secret room, not only Yi Xiaonan and Dong Wangtai were there, but also a true fire spirit refinement realm martial artist was also there. Moon-worshipping cult's holy maiden was currently sitting cross-legged in the center with her eyes closed. Her whole body was drenched in sweat, and her expression was very painful. Yi Xiaonan frowned and said, Great Si Ming, what's the situation? That true fire spirit refinement realm martial artist was Great Si Ming of moon-worshipping cult's 9 great magus priests. He was most proficient in primordial spirit's secret techniques. Hearing this, he smiled bitterly and shook his head. Cult master, I'm afraid the holy maiden is in danger this time. Actually, with the holy maiden's talent and mental state, she is one of the best among the previous holy maidens. But the longevity goo has been passed down for so long, and it has accumulated too many holy maidens' imprints. Now that it erupted in one go during the inheritance, let alone the holy maiden, I'm afraid that even I can't withstand it. Longevity goo, this goo worm, can't be used in the future. No one can withstand this impact. In other words, those who can withstand this impact don't need the longevity goo to carry on the inheritance. Everyone present furrowed their brows. Even Dong Wangtai, who was not used to moon-worshipping cult's holy maiden, who was born in Miao region, was the same. After all, this was the holy maiden of moon-worshipping cult, and they had watched her grow up. It would be fine if she died in the pugilistic world, but her death here was worthless. At that moment, Chu Xiu suddenly said, If everyone trusts me, I can make a move and save your sect's holy daughter. Dong Wangtai looked at Chu Xiu in surprise. He knew that Chu Xiu was strong, but was he also good in this aspect? Great Si Ming was even more direct. Cult Master Chu's name shakes the pugilistic world, we all know this. But the longevity goo has already fused with the Holy Maiden's primordial spirit. It's not enough to remove the power of the goo with just the power of the primordial spirit, or else the Holy Maiden will still die. Hence, we must use the power of the primordial spirit, with extremely precise control, to block the impact of the primordial spirit and remove the imprints without harming the goo. If only a strong primordial spirit could solve this, Cult Master would have done it already. Chu Xiu calmly said, "Don't worry, my attainments in the Tao of the primordial spirit are not any worse than yours." Yi Xiaonan looked at Chu Xiu and asked in a deep voice, "Price?" Chu Xiu said, "Simple, no big price. Since I saved her, I need her to do something for me in the future. It's as simple as that." Yi Xiaonan didn't even think, okay. If she died now, there would be nothing left. After Yi Xiaonan agreed, Chu Xiu's side moved immediately. He waved the Six Paths reincarnation bracelet in his hand and the golden Yuanshan radiance instantly enveloped the Holy Maiden. Great Si Ming's eyes were filled with shock. In Chu Xiu's power of Yuanshan, he sensed a power that made his heart tremble. This was definitely not as simple as the power of Yuanshan. At this moment, in the Holy Maiden's mind, endless illusions were eroding her Yuanshan, causing her true spirit to hide in the deepest part, shivering. Every layer of illusion was left behind by a saintess of the previous generation. The goo of longevity was immortal, but it plundered the lifespan of the previous Holy Maidens. Hence, while each generation's Holy Maiden was powerful, they would inevitably have some resentment. When they died, these resentment imprints would fuse with vital qi, and when they accepted the inheritance, these things would explode in an instant. The power was terrifying. Moon-worshipping Holy Maiden smiled bitterly. She was already mentally prepared for today's situation. But she still didn't expect the impact to be so great, as if there was no end to it. When her Yuanshan was completely exhausted and her true spirit was destroyed, everything would be over. Just when she was in despair, a golden ray suddenly appeared. The golden ray of Yuanshan turned into the Six Paths reincarnation, blocking in front of her Yuanshan, blocking all the illusory imprints that were attacking her and sending them into the Six Paths reincarnation bracelet. However, the inheritance power of the longevity goo, as well as some information, were precisely collected by the Six Paths of reincarnation and fused into the mind of the moon-worshipping sex saintess. In front of the Six Paths reincarnation bracelet, the golden ray formed a figure that moon-worshipping Holy Maiden never expected. Chu Xiu. Chapter 1298. The moon-worshipping cult Holy Girl could guess that Yi Xiaonan and others would find a way to save her when she was in trouble. But she didn't expect that the person who saved her would be Chu Xiu. In fact, although the moon-worshipping cult Holy Girl and Chu Xiu had a friendship, this friendship was not too deep. Moreover, since Chu Xiu rebuilt the Kunlun Devil cult in Kunlun Mountain, the two sides were no longer on the same level. At this time, seeing that it was actually Chu Xiu who made a move, she still felt a little complicated. Don't just stand there, quickly accept the inheritance power in longevity goo. Otherwise, if it is wasted, you will have experienced such a dangerous situation in vain. Hearing this, the moon-worshipping cult Holy Girl quickly calmed down and began to absorb the power in longevity goo. After the Six Paths of reincarnation bracelet removed all the imprints in the longevity goo, the aura of the moon-worshipping cult Holy Girl also began to skyrocket. The moon-worshipping cult Holy Girl was a martial artist of the same era as Chu Xiu. The martial artists of that era, not including monsters like Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian, had already stepped into the true fire spiritual refinement realm. Even those ranked in the top dozens on the Longhu list had already stepped into the real pellet state, becoming the mainstay of various sections. The strength of the moon-worshipping cult Holy Girl could definitely be ranked in the top 10, but she had always maintained the realm of unity of man and nature. From then on, Chu Xiu felt something was wrong. At this time, the aura of the moon-worshipping cult Holy Girl skyrocketed from the unity of man and nature to the real pellet state, true fire spiritual refinement realm, and even to the heaven and earth mystic connecting realm before stopping. Moreover, the aura on her body was not weak at all. Instead, it was extremely stable as if she had been in this realm for a long time. This was the effect of the longevity goo. It was indeed miraculous. While inheriting strength and martial path, it could even inherit the comprehension of realms. However, the martial artists of the heaven and earth mystic connecting realm, such as the high priest and Dong Wang Tai, saw the cultivation of the moon-worshipping cult holy girl rising to the same level as them in an instant. Their expressions didn't change. This kind of thing was not enviable. After being consumed by longevity goo, the holy girl of each generation could not live more than 100 years old, and some even died at the age of a few decades. They would rather cultivate hard in exchange for the strength of the heaven and earth mystic connecting realm. After a long while, the holy maiden of the moon-worshipping cult opened her eyes. She stretched out her hand, and in her hand was a round black insect. Chu Xiu couldn't see its head or tail, and if it weren't for the fact that it was still trembling, he would have thought it was dead. This seemingly inconspicuous thing was the longevity goo that created so many generations of moon-worshipping cult saintess. Yi Xiaonan flicked her finger and powerful astral qi instantly shattered that longevity goo. Dong Wang Tai and the sect-worshipping saint. Yi Xiaonan said plainly, "From today onwards, my moon-worshipping cult will no longer need longevity goo. Saintess, write down all the goo techniques in your inheritance and store them in the scripture pavilion." The holy girl nodded, "Yes, sect master." With that, the holy maiden of the moon-worshipping church bowed to Chu Xiu and said with a smile, "Thank you for your help, sect master Chu." Moon-worshipping cult saintess was a heavenly beauty to begin with. After receiving the longevity goo inheritance, her temperament changed even more. She became spirited and charming, like a fairy born from Miaozhang's myriad mountains, charming but not evil. Chu Xiu said, "Don't thank me yet, I have a price for saving you. Cult Master Yi also agreed to it just now. After I save you, you have to do something for me in the future." The holy girl showed a charming smile and looked at Chu Xiu coquettishly. "Cult Master Chu saved me. Not to mention one thing, I can do 10 things for you. I will do whatever Cult Master Chu wants me to do." Dong Wang Tai was a little old-fashioned and couldn't stand the saintess of moon-worshipping cult the most. He couldn't help but cough and frown. "Pay attention to your image. Cult Master Chu is here. Don't embarrass my moon-worshipping cult." The saintess of the moon-worshipping cult immediately put away her flirtatious look. She put her hands on her waist, raised her eyebrows at Dong Wang Tai, and said, "Cult leader Chu didn't say anything, so how dare you make irresponsible remarks here? Besides, don't all men like this? Now I am the same as you, I have stepped into heaven and earth elemental opening. If you are not convinced, let's go outside and practice." In moon-worshipping cult, the holy girl's position has always been above the 9 great magi. Provoked by her, Dong Wang Tai said angrily, Enough." Yi Xiaonan shouted in a low voice, and suddenly everyone was well-behaved, shrinking to the side. Yi Xiaonan rubbed her head, seeming to have a headache. "Excuse me." Chu Xiu smiled. "It seems that people in moon-worshipping cult are also sentimental people, it's no big deal. Since this is the case, I am going to leave. I still have people to visit in West Chu." Moon-worshipping cult saintess asked, "Where is Lord Chu going?" Chu Xiu looked to the west and said lightly, "To the Taoist master's mansion, to visit the old Taoist master." Outside the Taoist master's mansion, when the people heard that Chu Xiu had come to visit, they all panicked. It was no wonder that the Taoist master's mansion was in such a state. It was just that Chu Xiu's deterrence was a bit too great. After the destruction of the Storm Sword Tomb, everyone in the Jianghu knew that Chu Xiu had taken the last step and surpassed the peak of heaven and earth elemental enlightenment. Most cultivators didn't know that there were 9 heavens of martial immortal. In their opinion, Chu Xiu was on the same level as Dugu Weiwei 500 years ago, so everyone was in a constant state of anxiety. As a righteous sect, they didn't know why Chu Xiu had come here, but it was definitely not something good. Seeing everyone's panicked appearance, the old Taoist master couldn't help but scold, "You cowards, what are you panicking for? No matter what, I have lived for hundreds of years. How can Chu Xiu, the leader of a demonic sect, put down his face to bully an old man like me?" Go, invite him up. Don't be rude. Zhang Qingjin carefully glanced at the old Taoist master. Why does the old Taoist master's words sound like he's taking advantage of his seniority? This time, the old Taoist master didn't receive Chu Xiu in the courtyard at the back of the mountain, but in the main hall of the celestial master mansion. Chu Xiu walked into the hall with a smile on his face. He cupped his hands and said, "Old Taoist master, it's been a long time. You're still as healthy as ever. It looks like living another 100 or 200 years won't be a problem." The old Taoist master shook his head and said, "I'm afraid I'll be struck by lightning even if I live another 100 or 200 years. Who knows when I'll die? After living for so many years, I've already accepted it." Chu Xiu said in a deep voice, "Is that so? If you become a martial immortal, it won't be difficult for you to live another 100 or 200 years, right?" Chu Xiu's words made the old Taoist master tremble. He said in surprise, "What did you say?" Chu Xiu said calmly, "In the past, I was too weak to see through you, old Taoist master. But in truth, you've been a genius since you were young. You've been at the peak of the profound understanding realm for over 100 years, so why haven't you become a martial immortal? I know it's not that easy to break through the martial immortal realm, but with your strength and the power of the entire celestial master mansion, it shouldn't be difficult for you to find a natural treasure and use it as an opportunity, right? After all these years, I can only see through a portion of the power you've accumulated. I can't even see through the rest. If you want to become a martial immortal now, you should be able to do so. But why not?" Even the others from the celestial master mansion looked at the old Taoist master after hearing Chu Xiu's words. They didn't know the old Taoist master had such strength. The old Taoist master sighed and pointed to himself. "Cult Master Chu, you're actually very enviable. Young people are always enviable. I'm already a person from the previous era. So what if I've lived longer? I'm still just an old man." "You're right. I've actually already accumulated enough power over 100 years ago. I already had the opportunity and comprehension to become a martial immortal. But, I didn't dare to do so. Cult Master Chu, since you've become a martial immortal, you should know how intense the natural energy is when you make a breakthrough to the martial immortal realm. When the natural energy from the outside world surges into my body, the natural energy in my body will affect the laws of the world, causing my body and soul to be rejuvenated. I can no longer withstand the impact. What a pity. I could have done it several decades earlier, but by the time I had the ability to do so, my body couldn't allow it anymore. Perhaps, when I really can't take it anymore, I'll attempt to make a breakthrough. Even if I can only experience the feeling of becoming a martial immortal for an instant, it'll be worth it." Although the old Taoist master sounded a little regretful, he had already gotten over it after so many years. At the same time, there was also a hint of threat in his words. Although he would never be able to make a breakthrough to the martial immortal realm in his lifetime, if he was forced into a corner, he would be able to unleash the battle prowess of a martial immortal even if his body couldn't withstand it. Chu Xiu said with a deep voice, "Old Taoist master, you're wrong. The most important aspect of becoming a martial immortal is your ability to comprehend the power of laws. As for the impact to your body when you reach the martial immortal realm, although there will be some, if you find a place with an abundance of essence and only absorb the powerful essence to cleanse your body, and use the power within your body to activate the laws, you will not cleanse your body, but rather use it to guide the flow of energy. With that, as long as your body hasn't completely decayed, you will be able to endure it." The old Taoist master forced a smile and said, "You make it sound simple, but where can I find such a blessed land in the pugilistic world? At any rate, I've never heard of any place with such an abundance of natural energy." "There is." "Where?" "The heavenly gates." Chu Xiu did not continue to keep the old Taoist master in suspense. He simply repeated what he had told Yi Xiaonan to the old Taoist master. The celestial master's mansion was established earlier than the moon-worshipping church. As such, they knew more about the Daoist secrets than the moon-worshipping church. Most importantly, Yi Xiaonan had become a martial immortal, whereas the old Taoist master had been stuck at that bottleneck for over 100 years. The impact he had received was even greater than Yi Xiaonan. Chapter 1299. Although the old celestial master's expression didn't change much after hearing about Chu Xiu's news, it took him a long time to digest it. The old celestial master heaved a sigh of relief and said, "So you're going to join forces with the celestial master abode to attack the heavenly gate?" Chu Xiu nodded and said, "That's right. Of course, it's not just the celestial master abode. I just left the moon-worshipping cult. I'm going to mobilize the entire pugilistic world this time. Therefore, I came to deliver this news to you in hopes that the celestial master abode can restrain themselves during this period. If I want to mobilize the entire pugilistic world, my methods may not be so gentle. When the time comes, someone might come to the celestial master abode and ask them to stand up for me." Chu Xiu chose to personally visit the moon-worshipping cult in the celestial master abode not only because of Yi Xiaonan and the old celestial master's strength, but also because there were not many forces in the lower realm that could truly threaten him. The North and South Buddhist sects had been destroyed. Chu Xiu didn't care about the remaining remnants. The only ones left were the Devil Dao's moon-worshipping cult and the Taoism celestial master abode. Therefore, Chu Xiu went to them first to ensure his sincerity and also to avoid trouble. The old celestial master heaved a sigh of relief and said, "But I still have one thing that I'm very confused about. According to what you said, as long as the heavenly gate is breached, the Daoist's power will seep into the lower realm. We can all benefit from it. What can you, Cult Master Chu, get? To put it bluntly, you, Cult Master Chu, have never been a charitable person." Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows and said, "I only want two things. The first is the collection that the heavenly gate has accumulated over the years. I want all of them. I was the one who planned to attack the heavenly gate, so I'm not going to give these things to others. The second is Jun Wuxian's life. Old Celestial Master, you should know that I was plotted against in the rift created by the battle between Dugu Weiwei and Ning Xuanji. I almost died there. Old Celestial Master, you should be able to guess who the culprit was." The old Celestial Master nodded. He was not the only one who knew. Back then, many people had guessed that it was Jun Wuxian who did it. Other than him, no one else had the ability or reason to do so. Chu Xiu said in a low voice, "Old Heavenly Master, I attacked the heavenly gate for personal gain and personal grudges, but it was also beneficial to the entire pugilistic world. The heavenly gates had blocked the seal of the upper and lower realms for so many years, and they had used the benefits to create many powerhouses. You only know that Elysium has 9 divine generals, and the weakest is at the true fire god refinement state, but do you know that Elysium also has a secret realm where disciples are secretly trained? The weakest among them is at the real pellet state. For so many years, the Elysium had been like raising venomous insects, allowing them to fight among themselves. The 9 great divine generals were the best among them. Do you know how many children in the world have gone missing, far away from their parents? Moreover, when the people of Elysium went out to look for the heavenly key, they would easily destroy their families. Their methods were cruel, and their crimes were innumerable. The great hero Chu Kuanga, whom I respected the most in the past, died in the hands of the Elysium's divine generals. The former chief hall master of the Guanzhong torture room, Guan Siyu, who cultivated me, also died in the hands of the Elysium's divine generals. If the Elysium is not eliminated, the evil in the pugilistic world will not be eliminated. Old Celestial Master, join forces with me to eliminate the Elysium, and at the same time, get rid of the evil in the pugilistic world." Chu Xiu's words were righteous, and his whole body seemed to be blooming with light. However, many of the martial artists of the Celestial Master Mansion present were speechless. Who in the entire pugilistic world didn't know who Chu Xiu, Cult Master Chu, was? The person the cult master of a cult respected the most was the great hero Chu Kuanga? What a joke. Moreover, everyone knew that Chu Xiu was already at odds with Guan Siyu when they were in the Guanzhong torture room. After Guan Siyu's death, he even more wantonly eliminated dissidents and occupied the Guanzhong torture room with extremely forceful methods. At that time, no one could see that Chu Xiu respected Guan Siyu in the slightest. However, although they didn't believe Chu Xiu's words, they had vaguely heard about the Elysium. The Elysium was not a demon, but the things they did were still intolerable to the righteous in pugilistic world. Of course, even if they couldn't tolerate it before, they still had to. Otherwise, even if Jun Wuxian didn't appear, if the 9 great divine generals of Elysium attacked at the same time, how many people in pugilistic world could stop them? The old celestial master heaved a sigh of relief and said, "When are you going to attack the Elysium? Just give the celestial master mansion a message. After you leave, the celestial master mansion will seal the mountain and won't see anyone." A smile appeared at the corner of Chu Xiu's mouth. He knew that the old celestial master had agreed. Chu Xiu cupped his fist and said, "Old celestial master, please rest assured that I only came to destroy the Elysium this time. For the interests of other sects, as long as they don't block my way, I won't touch them." After speaking, Chu Xiu suddenly looked at Zhang Qingjun next to the old celestial master. "Brother Zhang, why do you people always like to play the trick of accumulating? Isn't it good to cultivate step by step?" Among the Longhu list of Chu Xiu's generation, Zhang Qingjun was the first to step into the real pellet state, and he was also the most dazzling young talent in that generation. But later, with the rise of Chu Xiu and others, the name of Zhang Qingjun was gradually forgotten. It was just that with Zhang Qingjun's talent, he had been cultivating hard in the Celestial Master Mansion for so many years, but he was still only at the real pellet state. This was obviously wrong. In the past, Chu Xiu couldn't see anything, but now he could clearly feel that Zhang Qingjun's body contained an extremely strong thunderbolt power, especially in his dantian. Chu Xiu could no longer detect the existence of martial Dao real pellet. Instead, it was replaced by a powerful thunderbolt. Zhang Qingjun smiled when he heard the words, "Brother Chu, I can't catch up with you, so I can only take some shortcuts. The big road leads to the sky, but there are too many people. The shortcuts can also lead to the peak. It feels good." Chu Xiu nodded and said, "Brother Zhang is bold. You and the Holy Virgin of the Moon-worshipping cult are very compatible. Old Celestial Master, Brother Zhang, then I will leave." After speaking, Chu Xiu turned and left, leaving only Zhang Qingjun feeling a little confused. What does the Holy Virgin of the Moon-worshipping cult have to do with him? Looking at Chu Xiu's back as he left, the old Celestial Master couldn't help but sigh. "I'm afraid the pugilistic world is going to be chaotic again." But then again, when was the pugilistic world truly peaceful? Perhaps this is the real pugilistic world. Go and notify them to seal the mountain. Seal the front and back mountains. Tell those who come to pray and burn incense to come again in a few months. During this period of time, the Celestial Master Mansion will not see anyone. After returning to the Daoist continent, he had been busy in the lower realm for a long time. The other Daoist celestial masters had all come out of seclusion. Among them, only Lu Jianghu had successfully stepped into the half-step martial immortal realm because he had witnessed the evolution of the power of rules. Although Shang Tianliang's harvest was not small, he was still unable to break through the bottleneck of the martial immortal realm. However, he was only a step away. Although Lu Fengxian and Mei Qinglian's strength had greatly increased, they were still unable to reach the half-step martial immortal realm. After everyone came out of their seclusion, Chu Xiu informed them about what had happened. Immediately, they all opened their eyes wide. They had only been in closed-door training for less than 2 months. Yet, Chu Xiu had actually managed to rope Chen Qingdi to his side. That said, this was also a good thing. After all, Chen Qingdi's strength spoke for itself. Furthermore, he also had the World Alliance with him. Wei Xia pinched the strand of beard on his chin. With a deep voice, he said, "In other words, we can attack the heavenly gates now?" Chu Xiu nodded. He said, "We can. However, I do not wish to lose too many of my subordinates. After attacking the heavenly gates, as long as I take away the extreme yang source energy from the heavenly gates, the spirit formation will definitely loosen up. At that time, the natural energy that will seep out will benefit the entire pugilistic world. Since that's the case, we cannot just sit back and enjoy the fruits of others' labor. I have already contacted the moon-worshipping church and the celestial master's mansion. They will act. At the same time, I will also contact the wind-sweeping pavilion and have them spread rumors. They will instigate a large number of loose cultivators and small sects to act. Wei Shia said solemnly, but it's only a few small sections. Most of the other sects value stability more than anything else. Even if you pass the news to them, they most likely won't respond. After all, they will benefit from you attacking the heavenly gates. If you fail, they will not be harmed. If they participate, the risk will be the greatest. Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, thus, it is not a good thing to sit back and enjoy the fruits of others' labor. I plan to send my subordinates to West Chu, Eastern Qi, Northern Yan and even overseas. I want them to gather their forces and attack the heavenly gates. Those that are obedient will join the alliance. As for those that are disobedient, you can do as you see fit. In any case, I'll leave them to you. In the entire pugilistic world, only the moon-worshipping church and the celestial master's mansion could attract Chu Xiu's attention. Therefore, Chu Xiu had personally visited these two sections. As for the remaining sects, if Chu Xiu visited them personally, it would be looking down on them too much. Looking at the people around him, Chu Xiu made a decision. Mei Qinglian would go to Northern Yan, Chu Wuji would go to West Chu, Lu Jianghe would go to Eastern Qi, and Lu Fengxian would go overseas. Lu Jianghe could not help but curl his lips and say, Great cult leader Chu, you are going a little too far. You are leaving the hardest bone to chew to me? Actually, Chu Xiu had considered this. Old Wei and Shang Tianliang were too strong. It would be a waste to let them go, so there was no need. The Northern Yan was Chu Xiu's base camp. The forces that were presentable were either on Chu Xiu's side or had been destroyed. Therefore, it was not difficult for Mei Qinglian to go. It was almost the same for West Chu. The strongest sects, the moon-worshipping church and the celestial master's mansion, had been dealt with by Chu Xiu. The others were not difficult. Only Eastern Qi had the most sects and was the strongest. Therefore, it was left to Lu Jianghe, who was the strongest, had the heaviest killing intent, and was also the most experienced. Actually, LV Fengxian's strength was not bad, but LV Fengxian was too amiable in the way he handled matters. Chu Xiu was afraid that he would not be able to control the situation, so he asked him to go to the overseas region to inform them. The people overseas had basically been killed by Chu Xiu, so there would not be any trouble. Chu Xiu was too lazy to explain to Lu Jianghe. He waved his hand and said, You are going to become one of the 4 demon sovereigns. If I give you a simple task, wouldn't I be looking down on you? Lu Jianghe scratched his chin. Although he felt that something was wrong, he nodded in satisfaction and said, That is reasonable. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.